3 of my 4 marriages. Nicely done.
I thought my voice actually carried.
I heard every word. Everybody else can go to hell but us.
Do you want a mic too?
Do I need a mic?
You don't need one, but...
Another opening, another show.
I want Strat to hear you.
What? Strat can hear me just fine, right? Look at it. That sage nod. There it is. Michael, say hi to Rick. Rick, say hi to Michael. So, whose character we assassinated? We haven't got it.
That comes for another couple of minutes.
So realistically, are you doing comics anymore, or are you okay?
Yeah, actually I am. Doing a series with Kelly Sue DeConnick called Parisian White. It's a creator-owned series, but it's interesting that we're talking about this stuff with theater and painted stuff and comics and the whole vernacular. And one of the things that I'm finding out is that, and I don't know if you've gone through this as well, I'm having a hell of a time deciding on how I want to approach it or how it wants to dictate itself to me. Because it's like I want to do something that's painted, but yet I think that cartooning is still, like everybody talks about how all art aspires to music. I think all art aspires to cartooning, to be honest. I mean, it sounds like a kind of a silly thing, but the idea of saying that the ultimate truth through the lie, that to me is the essence of cartooning, is to find the absolute truth of something through the simplicity of it, and that's what gets.
Now, define cartooning for me by your terms and standards. But before you do, let me call my wife.
Okay.
I told her I'd call before I got started, and I fucked up, and I told her I wouldn't, and if I did, I'd take the shit. So bear with me just a moment, won't you?
Okay, so I'm just going to continue, and if anybody falls off, I'll just hit, falls asleep, I'll just hit Howard. What I'm aware of is that everything I'm going through right now in terms of trying to figure out how to approach it, I keep thinking that I used to understand what I was doing. It's like all of those answers were completely just right there to be gleaned in without any kind of effort whatsoever. And I realized that everything I've worked on has been difficult and a slog and fighting through like the not knowing.
I find that shocking.
Yeah.
I really do, because I watched you work, and one of the reasons that I'm very envious of your work, and I'm envious of a lot of things, but most people's work does not make me jealous. Bill's work makes me jealous, and I've watched him work, and I've watched your facility flow. Maybe you're berserk inside, but it doesn't show in any way. I'm serious, because you remember that thing that Fred Caraval wrote about with Earl Oliver Hearst, Earl Oliver Hearst and the illusion of spontaneity.
Okay, yes.
I am the illusion of spontaneity. My sloppiness and roughness comes out of constantly polishing, and I've watched you explode. I've been there. I watch you work, and I find it hard to believe that you struggle as much as you say you do.
No, it's a constant struggle. I literally feel like I am correcting, I'm making a mistake, correcting, making a mistake, correcting. It's a difference between working in acrylic and working in watercolor. Okay.
Now, do you use acrylic as a watercolor, or do you literally use watercolor?
I use watercolor. I jump into every medium I possibly can, partly because, to me, acrylic is fixing and making mistakes and fixing. Watercolor is checkers and chess. It's thinking ahead.
So why bother playing with a medium? No, excuse me. Why bother playing with a medium that creates challenges that can be solved by using another medium to play its part?
Masochism?
Ladies and gentlemen, my work is done.
It's like wanting to know how to use a medium.
I'm using them for 5 minutes. I'll be right back.
Okay, sure.
You can do it. He's incredible.
It's interesting that we were talking about the love of theater. I was actually involved with a woman for about 15 years who was one of the co-creators of a show called Godspell. And,
is that right?
Yes.
No shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll be back.
Okay. So who said that? It actually helped me become much more aware of theater. And you know, we're talking here tonight about process, and that's at least what it feels like that we're sort of getting into right now. And the idea of, and as if anybody else out here who's an artist or a writer, it's like you may have people that you find that were influences to you or for you, other people who sort of paved the way, and other people who sort of became influences in the sense of, I'm going to try to do it in this way and not that way. It's like you find, by the choices we make of our influences, it's almost like it's already innately within us. By virtue of our choices, of what we're drawn to, it's almost like you know, it's sort of the old paradigm of, why is it that a masochist will find a sadist in a city of millions of people? It's
They
like,
live next door.
right. Well, it's like the idea of just everything. You're not on the hook or anything. You're all good. It's all
Oh yeah, no, my ass is safe now.
Oh, okay, good.
My wife owns my ass, for the record. And, huh? There you go.
Yeah,
Back to you.
I thought you knew that about.
No, I had no idea.
Yeah.
See, that interests me so much more than anything else. But you knew that going in. So again, we weren't assassinating character yet. So.
No, we weren't. Actually, I was just sort of going off on my own tangent about what we choose as influences are almost things that are innately, already inherently part of who we are. It's like I can look at a certain style of work, and I'm not going to do these character assassination yet, and it will absolutely not register, or it will register in the sense of I'll look at people's work that is technically fucking brilliant, and yet antiseptic to me, and it holds no interest to me whatsoever. Whereas I will see something that feels right, is technically, artistically, academically wrong, but it feels honest and true, and I will be like, that's what I want.
Is Dave Johnson here? Okay, Dave's not here.
Yeah.
He's talking about his
Right, yeah.
All right. The reason I mention this specifically because Dave turned me on to Dan Panosian stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
I only knew Dan as what he was. Okay. And I looked at this, he had freak of shit. It was fantastic. And I said, before I had a chance to stop myself, as we occasionally blur, I won't name the name that I used, I said, he's that guy, only interesting.
Right. Okay.
Right?
I agree.
You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Maybe I'll tell some of you later. And that's exactly right. You know, it's like, I mean, I collect illustration, as you know, and you owe me some money, isn't it? Witnesses. There you go. And my collection reflects both my own specific interests and tastes, but also stuff that has nothing to do with what I do. And hers is a perfect example of that. I mean, Beckhoff is an entirely other idea, but you know, I like to look at stuff that has nothing to do with what I do or think, because it makes me think about stuff that I should be thinking about beyond what I care about. And I assume that's what you're talking about as well.
To a degree, there is. I mean, when you mentioned Beckhoff, I mean, talk about originals. I mean,
well, I have those, but I also have four Beckhoff paintings.
Yeah, Harry Beckhoff. For those of you again looking it up, he was like I suppose he could be considered like a microbiologist. I mean, the way he drew.
An eccentric guy who worked from the late 20s to the early 70s without any change in style. His work was flat color and line, done with a very delicate hand. He was a mailman who decided to try his hand at illustration in the late 20s. And the only thing that changed was the hairstyles. The drawing was consistent and constant. And what made him so eccentric was his original pencil drawings were the size of playing cards. This big. I'm not being in any way facetious. And the drawing in these things is so exquisite as to be beyond belief. And frequently it's better in that original little pencil drawing than it is in the finish. He's an astonishing draftsman. He was also a mascot and a beloved figure of his fellow illustrators. He's very close friends with James Montgomery Flagg and Dean Cornwell. He modeled for a number of Cornwell's pieces. And at a roast, Flagg did a caricature of him using a microscope to use a Bolopticon to look at one of his drawings. and he's an astonishing talent. I have a back off of a draft board, a group of people sitting listening to a speech over the toilet in my middle floor bathroom. So I watch it every time I urinate. And I go where the walls are, you know. And every time I look at this piece, I find something new in it. So there's just an attitude. It's that piece of all the people listening, as the guy standing on the stairs on the dais, and it's just filled with acting. And Bill and I think the one thing we share beyond any other interest is acting, because we work in a business that has been like trammeled over the past, say, 25 to 30 years by a diminishing sense of sale, coupled with a circling of the wagons to do the same thing that got the sale to diminish in the first place in a lot of places. And both of us are guys who do characters who act. And going back to the theater stuff.
Right.
You know, and the guys whose work I like in comic books are the guys who do characters that are engaging with me. Some years back, I was on a panel with two guys, very nice guys. You know, they both had those huge hipster beards that were so popular a couple of years back. They were very young. They had hats that were on backwards and shit. And one was wearing a pork pie. They were like the Dobie Gillis and Maynard G. Krebs of their time. And they were talking about a book they'd done, and it sounded really interesting. I won't say the book. I won't say these. You know, and I bought the trade. 5 issues in the trade, and it was all brown. Hi, Scott. It was all brown. All the characters. None of the characters looked at each other. There was no physical body language of any kind. And in 5 issues, there wasn't a single subjective image of any kind at any page. Not once did any of the characters engage with me as the reader. And that's something I know for a fact that he does constantly, and I do as well. Because I believe that one of the things we forget about in comics is you are in collusion with us. It is a shared experience. You are the engine of the page. Okay? You're responsible for moving the story along. We're responsible for giving you enough of a story to make you give a shit enough about moving that story along. And so much of that, in my opinion, is a subjective relationship with the reader. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's interesting when you were saying that about, getting back to what you said about theater. I remember having a conversation with Stan Drake. Stan Drake, who was a phenomenal illustrator for romance strips called Heart of Julia Jones in the 60s and 70s, eventually went on to do the Blondie.
Which makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, as he said, well, that was again because the romance stuff had dried up.
Right.
But he
wouldn't have gone to work for Marvel.
He was doing inking for Marvel. Mm-hmm. He was doing it, but there was more money in in doing the Blondie stuff because of the connection with Dean Dean Young and Raymond. I forget Raymond's son.
Jim Raymond.
Jim Raymond.
Now was he fast on that?
Oh, he's very fast. Yeah.
On that stuff too, on the Blondie stuff?
Well, eventually he became much faster. When he first started out, he actually had clip files of just nothing but the images, and that he would lightbox. And he goes, I'm not a cartoonist. He goes, I'm an illustrator drawing in the style of a cartoonist.
That's exact. When he took on the assignment, that was my reaction.
Right.
But let me digress.
Yeah, no, and he would say that. But one of the things that he did, he also said, was that theater, he also brought up theater. He said that comics, in terms of acting, he said what was really important for comics is he said that he really sort of despised the Mary Worth style of stuff where all the characters are sort of looking off to the corners of the panels and sort of interacting. And Stan felt that it was not over there. It was over there. It was a grand gesture. So, and again, Neil sort of came in after Stan and sort of did everything with the hands and all that. So I'm getting a cup of coffee, But
I think that's a really valid point. Stan really is a pivot in that sense. There's a guy who teaches up at Stanford, he teaches film studies, named Scott Buchanan, who I've known since he was a kid. He lived around the corner from me and Simonson, who were living in Brooklyn. And he had never really heard of Drake's work. He wasn't aware of it. And I sent him a copy. I wrote an introduction, one of Charlie Pelto's paperback trade paperbacks of the material. And he was flabbergasted by his relationship to what he was teaching in film studies. That selling of the idea, Drake. I don't know anything about Drake other than than the Alex Raymond stuff and some other things that Dennis has told me. But for a fact, the work represents, in these 3-panel daily strips, a level of emotional depth that is almost absent from most comic books today.
Well, if you don't mind, I can actually tell you how we look at, the same thing with Bernie Fuchs as an illustrator. Bernie, the sort of captured moment, the sort of little bit of as opposed to something being set up as a plateau and this sort of freeze. Stan came by all of that incredibly honestly. Stan was, as a younger guy, he was actually a really good-looking guy. He wanted to be an actor.
I see the picture,
right,
yeah.
And his father was also, I think, a radio guy. Stan, one of his friends, or a bunch of his friends, got together and put Stan, they basically took Stan's name and entered him into an audition contest for film. Stan went out to LA, and he actually did, he said that he smoked he goes, I went through 3 packs of cigarettes doing this scene with this woman, and he ended up getting selected to do a series that was going to be sort of a competition series for the, not the Dobie Gillis stuff, but the Mickey Rooney, the whole Mickey Rooney stuff.
Like Andy Hardy?
Andy Hardy type stuff. As not necessarily like younger than the Hunts Hall stuff that eventually became going, but he was actually going to be he was going to be an actor on film.
And what happened?
What happened was he was all set to go. He signed the contract. The next day was December 7th,
Right.
1941. Stan went to the military. He became,
Vietnam.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So when Stan got out, he wanted to look for all of his, all of the film, and it was all pretty much destroyed. And it was actually, I'm blanking on his name now, Jackie Gleason, and Art Carney, who was a friend of his, said, look, at any given time, there's only 15% of any actor working. He said, you're really a gifted draftsman. You should get into,
See, what surprises me is that he didn't become a comic book man. Because his stuff has everything that's called for in a comic book line. I mean, when I wrote an introduction for the Lev Gleason, Charlie Byro crime stuff. Crime Does Not Pay, the truly drecky comics, okay, they're really awful. And when you look at that stuff, you realize 2 things. One, it's the work of assistants. It's very clearly the work of guys working for other guys. And 2, in all likelihood, 1 out of 3 of those guys was working as a mainstream journeyman illustrator within 10 years of doing that. If you go to almost every illustrator you know of a certain generation, it's at least 1, 2, or 3 comic book jobs back in the day. And it's always that way, okay? And I've always wondered why those guys, like Koskotsky went from comic books to the strips, and it was just great. But Drake seemed to me like a natural to be doing it. And I thought, Gil Kane once rather sniffily, that's what he did, he was always sniffy, sniffily dismissed Neil Adams as making comic books safe for commercial art. Which I thought was a really astute observation, but hey, shut up. Come on. He's right, but fuck him.
don't be a
Exactly. I mean, we're digressing now.
Yeah, no,
Okay, you're okay with that? Okay.
It's totally fine.
Oh, you have a question?
I did have a question.
Was it a good one?
Yeah.
Stand up and share it with us.
All right. Couple things.
No, just one.
When you talk about Robert Fawcett, and
Stand
some
up.
of those guys,
Yeah.
that whole generation that was in
1940s and 50s, yes.
Yeah, in Westport, who did the famous artist book and
Right,
all
right.
that stuff. What we're not talking about, and we really, really need to pay attention to, opportunities weren't available to everyone.
Were or were not?
Were not. When we talk about comic books, we know specifically, as a Jew, that a lot of Jews could not work in mainstream. Yes. As a Brooklyn person, just like you,
Je suis un
this is
monster,
what we're
baby.
talking about.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we talk about that comic books were another venture that, the Waspy and other people.
But,
that's it.
to quote Robert Gordon,
But
as I said, there's a line in Hey Kids Comics where one of the characters says, "Isn't that what comics are? Jews fucking over Jews?" And I stand by that. You know, I mean, when I came into the business, we are going to digress into this. He opened it.
No, it's okay. I'm just taking in what he said, what you're saying, and also thinking, I'm Polish. I'm fucked.
The only Polish guy around in the general was Bob Powell.
I had no idea.
Oh yeah, Bob Podlosky. And no, what's that? What's it? Pulaski. And he was a raving Jew-baiting anti-Semite. Hated Eisner's guts. Sorry, guys, you know. And just because we killed Christ. I read about it in the paper. We did. Or at least we just got the contract. You know, it's okay. But I think you raise a valid point. That illustration was in its time a waspy business. The exceptions are a guy like Salt Pepper, who was clearly a landsman. But comics were a place for Jews to work. It's really true. And when I came into the business, all the old guys, with the exception of Murphy, who's this honey-boy Southerner, were either Jews or Italians. You know, I mean, I met Gil when I was 13, and he was just this tower, this fabulous figure, okay? And Joe Kubert, you know, and then Toth, who was also another Jew baiter, okay? When I went to work for Gil at the age of 18, I told this story last time I was here, and it's true. Gil was a guy who was like Casper Gubby. He was a man who liked talking to a man who liked to talk, and he was a very, very voluble guy. I am as well. And one day he said, "We're not going to work for about an hour." Okay, all right, whatever. And he said, "Here are the anti-Semites." No bullshit. Now bear in mind, these are the guys that he spent every Friday evening with having cocktails, because he was in Westport.
Yeah.
He was literally, you know, drinking, you know, pinkies up, you know.
Well, no, I'm just thinking,
All those-
interject.
you know what?
Well, I had dinner with Gil, my ex-wife, and Bert Hogarth.
Oh, that must have been one fucking
It's like,
ugly
and
night.
it's like, so I'm just
'Cause
reliving moments here. Go ahead.
Hogarth looked and sounded like a drawing he'd done of the Dean. I mean, he was one of the most loathsome people I have ever met in my life. And anybody who could intimidate Gil came, and he really put Gil through his paces.
As evinced by that night.
And I mean, half of my time spent with Gil in the last couple of years of his life was like, shed this stuff. You have outdone your influences. You have moved beyond your influences. And he never believed me. He died not knowing that. He died refusing to believe that, which I find really repulsive and scary, because it demonstrated the hold that he had on him. Because Gil was a perfect example of a monomaniac with no self-esteem, who hated himself deeply, who was just like filled with self-loathing. He has this nose job in 1949. And the minute the nose job takes place, he transforms from this shtetl boy, this extra and fiddler on the roof, into a Charles Saxon orangutan, who it turns out, by the way, did the same transformation. I always thought Saxon was a wasp, but Saxon was one of our people. A nice Jewish boy. Thank you, Charlie. You know, and as soon as that happened, all of that shtetl stuff, all that Yiddishkeit, lodged itself in his system to so profound a degree that he could take me, his first Jewish assistant, and give me the list of the anti-Semites. It wasn't until years later that I found out that, as I said, you know, all the guys, the Walkers, the Browns, all the guys that he drank, I went to cocktail parties with me on Friday nights. Years later, I'm at the Palm with my second wife. And the Palm was a tradition for us because the Palm it was a comic book art, a cartoonist place, where comics guys went to eat when they could afford it. And I'm walking down the stairs, I'm at Palm 2, and I'm walking down the stairs, and the bottom of the stairs is a drawing of Amy by Jack Tippett. And that was the first of the anti-Semites. And I literally had one of those sense memory moments of, like this. Just literally it registered on me without intellectually registering, but like emotionally maybe, oh my God, he's here, you know. And the fucked upness of the relationships of the comic book business that preceded mine, generation that did. Because these guys started at 14. They were children. You can't know how long these lives spent hating themselves, hating each other. You can't know how much Carmen Infantino and Phil Kane hated each other with a passion from the time that they were 14, till their deaths. I had to have Joe Orlando navigate for me the corridors of DC Comics because Carmine knew I knew Gil. Not a joke. The venality, the pettiness. We all promised ourselves we would never sink to that level. 5 years in, right on.
Well, Westport was kind of a microcosm of all of that too. I mean, one of the things that I found out, I mean, having dinner with Gil, I mean, and it's interesting because I remember reading his Atom comics, and it was like, and all of those fantastic images of, you know, looking up the nose of all of these characters.
I hate people who point that trope out.
No.
Leave the man alone.
No,
He's
but
dead.
no. But what I felt is that that's how I felt like that's how he viewed everybody. Is like he did talk to my boy.
And you know what? Well, I'll tell you where that came from if you want.
No, but what I'm aware of is that what you were just saying about the I guess the trauma, to put for lack of a better word. I can still recall how Gil and Byrne were at each other, and anytime, and Byrne was actually doing everything he could to not only destroy Gil, but also me. He was actually
That's right.
he was putting the moves on my wife at the time.
I remember this. Oh no, this guy's fucking
we were in our 20s. He was like what, 70s?
He was in dead for 3 years. There's nobody told.
Okay, that's right. Okay, yeah. But to see, you know, again, I wasn't super keen on or super hip, but I was able to catch these micro expressions on Gil's face of almost like he was sort of getting punched a bit, and it was really kind of, because to me both of these guys, more so Gil, because I knew Gil's work much better.
Well, and also, let's face it, Hogarth was a fraud.
Oh yeah, I mean, I bought those friggin', if you
Come on.
Those I bought those how the dynamic anatomy. They're like the trees die for that. It's horrible, you know? But it was interesting to see how he was just doing everything he could to, even if Gil was making a really good point, which he actually was. It was like Gil would, Hogarth would have none of it. It was almost like there was an attack mode that he was on, because he was making it all about him. At one point, he was talking to me about art history, and he mentioned, Fauvism, and I had no idea what Fauvism was. And he looked at me, and he was like, basically, he's like, can you believe he doesn't know who Fauvism? And he's hugging my wife, and just coming at me, and I was like, and at one moment, Gil and I just sort of looked at each other. It's like I'm like, he's like, you're on.
You cannot know the competition for the pile that existed from word one. I mean, I don't know what it was like for guys for you, because you were the guy of your generation, whether you know it or not. Okay, I mean, when you came in, Frank was inept and crude, but he had energy, and and rage, which is what I had. Okay, but you had skills already. What it was like for me when I came in to have Bernie Wrightson waiting for me in the room. This is a tragedy, okay? Because there is no way you can compete with Bernie Wrightson. Understand this? I mean, this is the truth. I mean, Wrightson was like, again, he worked hard, and his work got better and better as he aged. I mean, this is not like, but he emerged from the brow of Zeus. His work was astonishing. I mean, come on. If you see this work, and he was a cluck. I mean, he was kind of a dumbass. Sorry. But, he was like a turkey out in the rain with looking up, waiting.
No.
But the work was staggering. I mean, it was just fucking brilliant. Okay? And you couldn't compete. So you had to find some other way around. You had to do a workaround to get to where you wanted to be. And I believe that to a certain extent, you've made people feel the same way about your people, your crew. Because you came in 5 years after me. And between me and you, Starlin comes in. And Starlin is the first guy, other than Rich Buckler, who's available to what Stan needs. Okay? And I cannot convey how much my generation believed. Maybe it was just bullshit to each other. But we all believed, the second volume of A Kids Comics is about EC and its impact on my generation 20 years after the fact. And that impact comes from those Ballantine paperbacks that were hanging in the newsstands and drugstores in the early 60s. All of us in my generation, with the exception of Simonson, had come to comics because of those books. They had an enormous impact on us. And the fact that you come along and are able to satisfy Marvel's needs, because DC was functionally irrelevant. DC was a company that followed what Marvel was doing at that point. Marvel really owned the game at that time. And I have to think that guys coming along after you were intimidated by dint of the fact that you clearly do pretty much whatever you wanted to do. You may say it looked hard, it was hard for you to do it, but we both know that once it gets on paper, the difficulty vanishes and the papers will remain. And that people have a look at your stuff. I mean, I never understood, I do now, but I never at that time understood why the comic book audience preferred John Byrne's work to your work. And I do now. I understand why now. But it's for the same reason why Liefeld is a popular town. No, I'm serious. I believe.
Well, I've heard this. If you're going in this direction, I think you are. Forgive me for jumping in. But there is a perception among fans that if you're who want to get into the business, that they find a talent who sort of sets the low bar. Yep.
Whose career do you want to kill?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
no, that's fair. You know. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's to a certain extent the way it is. But I don't think there were fans out there who wanted to be you. And that saddens me. It really does.
What, that they did or did not?
Because
I mean, for
one of the things I've come to realize, Clark Diamond died this week. Clark Diamond was a guy who was an old EC fan, he's probably about 5 years my senior. He was the guy who in his writing, I had one of those epiphanies that like, yeah, why didn't I see this before? That the Comics Code Authority didn't just infantilize the comic book business, it also infantilized the audience. It also created an audience, it drove away an audience that would be interested in material that was pushed a little bit further, and left behind people who, in his words, would be happy with a pat on the head and a no prize. And, you know? And it really, it's functionally true, you know? I said this in print, and one of Byrne's acolytes became very upset with me, that if anybody had told me that the most popular artist of the 1980s would be someone who was as cipherous, I mean, John's work is incredibly proficient technically, but utterly uninteresting.
Well, it's interesting we're sort of, you know, talking about all of these different, you know, styles and everything else and different people, because there is kind of a through line to all of this, at least in the way I'm interpreting it. One thing I just want to say about Bernie, it's like when you mentioned Bernie, okay. About Bernie, yeah. Is that, you know, it's part of the issue is of working on something is the pain of loving something too much, or the curse of thinking about something too much. I think.
You think he was destroyed by the?
Well, I think Bernie thought about what he thought about. It's like you know, and only that. I don't think Bernie, like when you said that he might have been a cluck or whatever. It's like I don't think he necessarily was. I just think he didn't delve as deep into other arenas as certainly like. I will not only navel gaze, I'll climb up my own ass and turn myself inside out to avoid being one of those people who is absolutely sure that I'm right. I would rather presume a level of ignorance.
But that's the Catholic in you. I'm serious. It is true. It's that concept of doubt.
Right.
It's that constant questioning of moral value. That's really where it comes from. To a great extent.
Well, it has to do with certainty, because people people who are absolutely certain are, to me, some of the most dangerous people on the planet.
I mean, I live in a constant state. I mean, I'm a Jewish guy who was raised by Catholics. This is not a joke. I spent the first 3.5 years of my life in a Catholic family because I'm illegitimate. I'm a bastard, literally and figuratively. And I was planted in a Catholic family, the patriarch of which was the lighthouse keeper of New York Harbor. And they were German Catholics who changed their name from some incredibly horrible German World War I name to Westgate, so they became English all of a sudden. And they raised me, and I was deeply steeped in Catholicism until my mother found out they were converting me. And she pulled me out when she married the guy I thought was my father. And so I'm enraptured. If ever the day came that I ever was actually struck by a belief in God, it's likely that I would find myself as a Catholic, despite all the bullshit. Because there is the mystery, the very just the physical beauty of the Mass, everything about it. It staggers me. I can still bring up as sense memory of the smell of incense.
Yeah, so,
I mean, And when I read Camille Paglia about the statues of the saints, I got it. The lubriciousness of those statues, the sexiness of it. There's something so phenomenally attractive about shame in lieu of guilt. I'm not kidding. Come on, guilt is for, shame is of. Okay? And it's I'm completely obsessed with it. I really am. I love using at least one of my wives is a cat. What? Actually, two of them were, but I'm just one of them doesn't count. Well, we digress.
No, but one of the things that struck me from the very first moment I met you was there was no, even though you were very facile with your words, and there was a certain, and you weren't glib though. It was like there was a level of intellect and a constant striving about reason in everything that you seem to do. I mean,
and that comes from guilt.
But your methodology.
I need it. It's very, very sick. It comes from guilt.
Your methodology. I mean, like you would talk about when I remember there were a couple of times I think when I worked trying to assist you, and I think probably making things probably ultimately many times more worse and making more work for you.
Making me look bad.
No. There were things that the way you would approach things in terms of, because one of our biggest, interesting conversations, or not even necessarily areas of disagreement, was you're claiming to me that I lack structure.
And I still stand by
Okay.
that. But it's no longer the case.
Well, but there were times when, I mean, it's what led me to create the character of Harvard Chalky and Stray Toasters. It's like, who was all about structure, but it was...
And he didn't think I knew.
I'm sure people are going to tell. But the point is that the fact that you challenged me on that, it's like, as much as we had our moments of sort of back and forth, nobody made me think as much as you did about stuff.
And the reason for that obsession with structure is based on absolute insect fear. It really is. It's lizard fear. Because for me, I cannot imagine working the way Elmore Leonard did without an outline.
Right. Yeah.
I just can't. I mean, I love Leonard's work. He's certainly one of my 5 favorite crime writers.
Absolutely.
But every so often, his stuff just, get ready to run over by a truck.
Yeah.
And I feel that way about Alan, for example, Alan Moore. I was told he had to read Swamp Thing Saga. And I'm reading it, it's fantastic. And then it just sort of melts, goes away, fades.
But talk about structure, I mean, I've worked with Alan. So, so I actually...
So there's sweat labor in reading.
Well, no, I mean, like...
Have you ever read one of Alan Moore's scripts?
I mean, literally, they're like phone books, literally, like phone books.
And every sentence ends with, and of course, if you have a better way of doing this, please be my friend.
Which is sort of like having somebody in the closet saying, look, if you want to play football, knock yourself out. I mean, it was the kind of thing where I would work with him on it, and I would just read through everything, and he would give background characters, like stories and everything else, and I thought, how am I going to plus this in any kind of a way? Like, call him up and say, I gave a character a beard? It's like, so the point was, I'm either going to draw this, or I'm going to put a bullet in my head.
Now, how many pages did you do? Okay, issues. How many pages did you do?
With what was it? With big numbers? I did 32 pages with him in Brought to Light on the Red Contract, which was a whole other thing, and then I did 3 issues of 48 pages. I think at this point it's like it's lost to time. Yeah. But it's it's all a blur. It's like I literally painted myself into a corner with that. But
you figuratively painted yourself.
Literally, yeah, no.
So you literally and figuratively painted
yourself. Yeah, there we go.
You work English.
Well, the point of that is that I had 45 different models that I was working from, and I set up a standard for myself. I'm going to go in, I'm going to paint, I'm going to do things out of focus, I'm going to airbrush focus, so, I'm going to try to capture everything in the panel by hand. It's like, I'm going to airbrush stuff out, like I said, out of focus, I'm going to tighten things up, I'm going to make sure everything is legitimate. I got 45 different characters I'm working with, and I've got to hire models for stuff. And there was some scenes where there are little kids making Molotov cocktails. And of course, and Westport being very waspy, it's like, at the time I had long hair and blonde hair, and I'm driving around and I'm asking parents if I can actually take photos of their little kids. And I actually had to pretend that they were like making lemonade as opposed to Molotov cocktails.
Now, would you agree that in retrospect you wish you followed the rules of Steve Parkhouse done in a black and white and simple cartoon?
More than, yeah, it's absolutely, yeah. It's
The Bo Jeffries saga,
Yeah, it's
cut to the
yeah.
chase.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing that struck me more, is striking me more and more now as the more I'm doing, and it's like I'm ashamed in some respects that I have to keep relearning lessons that I thought I'd already learned.
What kind of easy is that? We all did. I mean,
Yeah,
one of the reasons you're still working, one of the reasons I'm still working, is that we are at least willing to admit that an annual reinvention is a requirement of the maintenance of the career. One of the reasons why there's only one other person of my generation who's doing work today that's not a parody of itself, is the fact that those guys become subsumed with satisfaction at the work they're doing, and they reach a certain plateau, and they begin to repeat themselves. And I'm too terrified to repeat myself. So I gotta find something else to do, okay? And I believe you're in the same boat.
Yeah,
You bore easily, so do I.
Now, do you bore easily on the same day, or do
No,
you take?
no,
Yeah, okay.
no. I have a work ethic that is enviable.
How long does it take for it to run its course?
I
know all that stuff is.
don't work in terms of time anymore.
Okay.
I don't work against time. I work against mission.
I can get that.
I'm very much, my work life is very organized. I live in a small town. I look like a hobo most of the time. And it's true, because I only clean up to be seen in public, because all these fucking selfies and shit. Peter knows
no
me.
idea.
I have breakfast with Peter on a regular basis, and I generally come in looking like a homeless guy who just stole your food. The fact
Suddenly I
is,
don't feel so bad.
No. Both of them working home in underwear is a very effective way of spending money. Unfortunately, my door's always open, But my Sunday night consists of knowing what I'm going to be doing on Friday next. I organize my time card. I really have it all laid out. I know what I'm doing. If I finish at 3, I'm done. I watch television the rest of the afternoon. If I finish at 7, my wife feeds me. When I was teaching at Marble, I did a six-year series of seminars at Marble. And the first day of that was always about time management, because comic books, and you know what I'm talking about, attracts hobbyists. All of us are guys who drew comics on our mother's cutting board on the dining room table. Everybody else is asleep. That's just it. Anybody who tells me they came to comics as a second choice is a lying sack of shit. Comics has more in common with the Jesuits than anything else. It is a calling.
It's the old, Arthur Miller, it chose you.
Exactly. The golden age of comics is 12 because that's really when it's imprinted on you. You know what's going on. You are owned by it. It takes your ass and it just steals your soul. And the difference between the generation that preceded mine and my generation and Bill's is that we went in with no expectations. I say this with complete, with no fear of contradiction. That this was it. It was the end. It was the be-all and end-all. The generation that preceded us, I believe, went in thinking this was a way station, leading to something else more important. And every one of those guys died, terrified to find out that the work that they held in contempt for 40, 50 years was the work of their hearts. And what separates us from that is that we went in with eyes open, that it was the work itself. I'll never forget, I'm at Marvel years ago, this is in the early 70s, and I meet Mike Esposito. And all of us, I was a big fan of Ross Andrew, because I had been schooled on Ross Andrew. Everybody hates Ross Andrew because of Mike Esposito, because he inked him badly and he really fucked him up. Esposito's pencils are breathtaking. His sense of depth, his sense of scale, his sense of volume. You can't have Jose Garcia Lopez without Ross Andrew. He's not as pretty as J.G. Young, but the volume and the shape and form. And I use the word fan in the company of Esposito, and the contempt, the utter drip of disdain with which he greeted this was staggering to me. It was like, sorry, shut up. And it was very revealing to me. Those guys had such contempt for their audience, for the readers, that it just ran deep and profound. Except for a couple of guys, Gil being one of them. Gil really, identified, was willing to listen to the audience, you know. But these guys just really were separated from that and woke up one morning and realized that nothing else was coming down the pipe, you know.
When you were talking about Byrne, you know, again, he lived in the one town over from me in Connecticut.
Well, he's like the Citizen Kane of Connecticut now, right? He lives in this mass house.
Except that he's now living in the remnants of the glass globe, you know? It's like everything is shattered around him, because actually, I remember when he was married, and I would, like, my experience with John can be summed up in this little anecdote, is that I remember going to Mark Grunwald, his memorial service, and I very rarely saw John at all. And John, I was actually with Mark's widow, and we were walking, we saw John, and John was standing on a stairwell, and we were looking, he was sort of overlooking everybody who was there for the memorial. And I walked over with her, and I'm blanking on her name right now, forgive me,
Mrs. Grunwald.
Yeah, Mrs. Grunwald.
I'm here to help.
Right, thank you. She's here all night, tip your waiters.
Try to be
Yeah,
Catherine.
I said, you know, it's
Catherine.
oh, thank you. I said, it's good to see you. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. And he just stopped and he said, well, you know me, Bill, nothing can keep me down. And then she turned and walked away. And then on the way home, because he actually gave me and my girlfriend a ride back, he proceeded to tell me that he wasn't like me. He goes, I'm not an innovator. He goes, I don't want to try something new. He goes, I'm a fixer. I take what's wrong with comics, what's been done before, and I fix it. And I thought it's like he just told me everything that, you know, about himself right there. And I'm not saying that to malign him.
No, but that is fantastic, because it goes directly, without naming names, to this thing I'm working on right now, this essay, which addresses the fact that we work in the business of universal pastiche.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
right.
That it is, you know, that is a variation on the theme business. It's all variations on themes, and that when you get down to it at its core, the paradigm in comic books is Chuck Jones's Roadrunner and Coyote. It's all about an endless, unfinished chase, in which characters that are corporately owned can never actually achieve closure in their world. And John is the architect of that. That's fantastic.
I'm anticipating the piano, you know, that will fall eventually. Now, what you were saying.
Drawn by Kyle Baker.
Yeah.
Kyle Baker, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, right?
Kind of just to go back to what you were saying earlier about Gil and about him going to his grave not knowing, you know, I mean, still being, you know, I don't know, tortured in some respects?
Yeah, I think so.
How much of that, and whether it's, I don't know, whether it's Catholic guilt or Jewish guilt or whatever.
It's Catholic shame,
Jewish, okay. Thank you.
Separate issue.
Well, how much of that do you feel fits the paradigm of somebody who gets into comics of that level of, because what causes comics to choose us? I mean, what is it in that you believe in our DNA that?
I found comics for me. I mean, I discovered comics when I was 4 years old. My two cousins, 8 and 12 respectively, had outgrown them, and they'd given me their comics. And in those days, this is 1955, you read all kinds. I read everything.
Same.
And I was imprinted on it immediately, in a way that nothing to up to that. And it was imprinted on me immediately, and instinctually I knew at 4 that someone made these things. That these were not organic objects that occurred. And I wanted to be that guy.
Right.
And I had no talent, no skill set. I never did, but I had hunger and blind rage. And
You can't underestimate.
there's a lot to be said for this.
Like,
Trust me.
You can't underestimate rage.
And Gil was very much the same. Okay, Gil was a guy who started his career imitating Jack Kirby. He came back from the service. He's imitating Alex Toth. And it isn't until he finds himself in a relationship with Hogarth, of developing that flayed figure. You know, going from from the Mac Rayboy, Captain Marvel Jr. figure, the Lou Fine figure, to getting these plates of muscle, those body things. And when he does that, he begins to develop a point of view. His problem, and I believe this is true, is that the great unifying factor of all the men who mentored me is none of them could write worth a shit. Gil couldn't write, Gray couldn't write, Woody certainly couldn't write. The one who's still alive can't write, I won't name the name. And because of that, they were trapped in the cycle of servicing other people's work. And when they tried to write, their rage came through in the text. Okay? And in Gil's case, he was a smart guy. He was an autodidact, 10th grade education. Left school to become a comic book man. And he could not get back, catch what it was, that common thread that maintained. Okay? When I met him, I worked with him on Black Mark, which was just awful. It was like just like one more Conan pastiche, And of course I wasn't I loved it, it's okay. And I realized that he no longer read the material that he was doing. He wasn't as conscious of what he was competing with as he should have been. Okay? And my feeling is, if you're going to compete, know the fuck what you're competing with. Okay? If you're going to write a Western, read the best Western you've ever read and try to destroy it. There's that line about, you don't learn to play tennis by reading a book about playing tennis. You learn to play tennis by playing somebody who can beat you. And that's what it's about.
Yeah.
Okay? And by the time he was doing this stuff, he lost any real interest, and he wasn't entertained by it, but he couldn't even analyze it. Extant and separate from being entertained by the material, he couldn't even analyze this stuff to understand it, to get value of it.
All right. He possessed the capacity to analyze. I mean,
no, I don't think he could bring himself to read the material analytically. I think he.
I'm talking about in general. I mean, analysis, not just simply of the medium, but to be thinking. I mean, because one of the things that I find is that people who really do have longevity, in a real true sense, are the people who are always questioning, who are always analyzing.
Oh, that yes, but not of the material itself. Look, you remember a couple of years back, you may not even be aware of it, there's a real kerfuffle going on in the comic book business about using photographs for reference. Okay. What? I mean, what do these people think? If you can do it, you do it. See how it works out for you.
Or light boxing.
Mock Drew Struzan and see how far you get. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Really, come on. Okay? And we all use photographs because basically we are in the business of capturing a version of reality. And I tried to teach Phil how to use photos. It was one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. I introduced him to Don Cameron, who was in awe of him. And just the frustration was huge because he never learned how to slow down. He was what Eisner thought Kirby was. He was a 6-page-a-day guy.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. And he couldn't stop. He couldn't go beyond the generic city, the generic car, the generic suit. Okay. And you and I both know that what sets us apart from guys like John is that there's a specificity to the choices you make. That woman is wearing a specific kind of shoes. Okay.
Everything, it's like the word cipher is thrown around a lot, but it's like, there's the cipher for an eye. You can do a Charles Schultz cipher for an eye. Basically, it's that. Whereas you take, like, say, a Neil Adams or a Stan Drake, if they just make it up without looking at photo reference, because of all the years that they have used photo reference, it's still a cipher. It's very different to look at your eye as opposed to your eye, as opposed to your eye, my eye.
Well, you have a mirror on your desk, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Everybody works with a mirror on their desk. I just posted a Times Square piece on Facebook, and Larry Hammond says, "All you guys look like your expression." So, I have a very, very active face. I may not be pretty. I used to be. But I've got there's stuff going on here that creates. So I got a mug, and you use your mug. That's what you do, These are just, you learn occasionally by accident, but you learn nonetheless. Okay?
So no, I mean, so what, but the fact that he didn't, introspect in that way, it's like, that's a really good point. Like, you need to be aware of what is out there. But how do you feel about the fact of some people who just sort of feel, I'm just gonna do my own thing, like a Zukalski or somebody like that. Like, again, he's not a comic book guy, but,
Look, come on. I mean, there's a website devoted to the fans of Alex Toth. And drawing like Alex Toth is not being influenced by Alex Toth.
I'm more in awe of him now than I ever,
It grows.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at this stuff and you say, and such an unbearable, insufferable human being. How was such a horrible person? Who's such and he really was. I mean, trust me. Just apocalyptically awful. David, you checking to see how awful he was? You doing the awful meter?
He loved you too, everyone.
What's that? No, he was the worst. He dated my second wife. What's that?
Who was worse?
Toth. Oh, yeah.
I was actually spared that.
Oh, David Armstrong introduced me to Alex Toth in 1975.
Hogarth talked about himself all the time. Alex did not talk about
No, he
himself.
talks shit about everybody else.
I'm okay with that. You get a lot of good gossip there.
There you go.
So, but I lost my train. Chris,
No,
Shit
we're talking about the.
you wanna see if there's anything else that's any direction they wanna push us in?
Yeah, okay, sure, that's fine.
You okay with
Yeah, I'm totally cool. Yeah, I'm totally cool. Everybody.
Are you enjoying this, or is this just?
Yeah.
We're not seeing Bill, except in passing, in about 15 years. We pass each other in the room, we communicate on Facebook, and we hate the same people. It's a really good thing. And I'm trying to, and I'm gonna be working on him later on this evening to try to make him hate other people that I hate that he hasn't learned to hate yet. There are people in this room who understand exactly what I'm talking about. Sparrow, I'm looking at you. And there you go. So, questions, thoughts, ideas, instincts? This guy was brave enough to stand up and offer a question about Jews.
I have a question.
Hey, Jack.
Hey, how you mentioned briefly like Gil's tendency of referring to everyone as Michael. Where did that come
Symphony
from?
Sid. Jumping with my boy Sid in the city. Jumping with my boy Sid in the city. He's the president of the DJ committee. Symphony Sid Cohen was a great disc jockey in New York City in the 40s and 50s. He was the guy who introduced Charlie Parker. Bud, the guy wants to say White Christmas. Come on, what do you say? And he ended his career after scandalizing his company by becoming a Spanish language DJ without speaking any Spanish. He literally worked phonetically in the last 2 years of his life. Soy su hermano, Symphony Sid, word. Swear to God. That's where Gil Kane got it from. Okay? That's where my boy came from. Also the fact that he never meant anybody's names because he was a complete solo system. But true. Scott, you had something?
Yeah, I've got a question for Bill. When you first started at Marvel, did you have to stay within the lines, or was there break free to be you? When you finally were able to break free and be you?
Okay, well, look, again, the similarity here, I mean, I will answer this, but it's like, comics picked me. It's the same way, I don't know how old you were when you basically said out loud, I'm going to do this for a living.
4.
Okay, you were 4, I was 7, I told my father when I was 7,
I mean,
like, this is my jam. But, when
In those words?
No.
I love it when an anachronism in a childhood story.
I think if anything at that point, it was like,
Dad!
I'm doing this, it's like, here's another thing you can blame on me for your drinking, It's like, but.
Yes, parents dead is good.
But I actually wanted to get into comics, pretty much was following through on that goal ever since I was a kid. Didn't think I was good enough for Marvel, so I actually went, in my second year of art school, all of my friends were older and they were graduating, and I sort of felt, well, let me just see if I can get a portfolio together for comic books, for DC. And I remember seeing that, I'm blanking on his name, I'll just leave it at that, who was actually doing work in sort of very Neil Adams style at the time, and I thought...
At DC or Marvel?
At DC. And I thought, if he can get work, I know I can get work.
Buckler.
No, Buckler was a Marl.
Jim Ostero?
Grell.
Oh, was it?
It was Jim
Grell.
It was Mike Grell. And again, I love Mike, great guy, but it was like, I
You
thought.
can take him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. I basically thought it was like, cause look, you have to admit, if you're gonna get into this business, you have to be, it's like everybody thinks about comic books being sort of this superhero benign, sort of silly stuff for kids. It's fucking cutthroat.
It's twat.
Yeah, it's what?
It's twat. It really is. We are just, it's,
Yeah.
I mean, as I said, 5 years in, we all became exactly the venomous shitheels that the previous generation did. You know, fuck you, no, fuck you, no. And to a great extent, I got my first major job, the Fanford job, because I aced another artist out of it. Another guy was assigned to the job. And I said, I can do a better job. I was lying, I couldn't. But the editor, Denny O'Neill, had doubts about the other guy's ability to deliver. Those doubts are perfectly justified. You know what I mean? I'll spell it for you. And I went home. He said he gave us a page rate and said, go home and do samples. I came in. I spent literally 48 hours drawing the fuck out of this stuff. And he phoned it in. I got the job. And typically I was not available to bring quality to the job, so it was a terrible job that I did. I spend most of my life, every night, going to bed, apologizing to the God I don't believe in for the first 8 years of my career. Okay. But that's how cutthroat things can be.
Right.
You know?
Well, there is a level of competitiveness, and I certainly felt that way when I would see other people who were getting jobs, and it was like, and that competitiveness actually.
All Andy knows is money, though.
What's that?
All Andy knows is money. You know? I want that guy's bucks. You know? Okay.
Well, yeah, I don't want that guy's bucks, because I oddly believe that there's enough to go around. You know, it's like I'm still a little bit of an, you know,
Wow,
I'm still naive.
You are the nicest person on the stage.
That's saying a whole lot.
No. Michael's just patient.
But anyway, real quick, I actually put together a portfolio of, and Neil Adams was the guy I grew up with, like,
Was he the guy whose career you wanted to steal?
I wanted to have, as much of a career as he had. I didn't necessarily want to steal it, because I didn't feel like I wouldn't be presumptuous enough to think I could steal it. I just wanted entry. And even though I had fallen in love with illustration, fine art, Rauschenberg, illustrators like Bob Peake and Bernie Fuchs, it was like all of this other stuff that encompassed art, from film to you name it, to music, that was already starting to percolate in there. But I thought, if I'm going to try to do comic books, to me, comics, I'll just go back to the Neil Adams stuff. Even though there was a whole period of time when I was nuts about Sergio Aragonés, I would just like slavishly copy Sergio.
I'd love to see that stuff.
Well, if you look at a lot of like my New Mutant stuff, with the mouths that go outside of the borders of the face, it was like that abstract expressionism type stuff.
So that was your heroin angle, though, wasn't it? Just comedy, kids, comedy.
My alcohol days. I mean, that's the reason I pretty much stopped was the breaking of the drawing hand. So. Yeah.
That was really stupid.
Yeah, I was, yeah. But it was a wake-up call. Wake-up call, yeah.
You could have done it by doing the other hand, though. Think about it. What does this girl think? Boy think?
Yeah. I think it's if anything, it allowed me to have something to share with Barry Smith, you know? So.
There's such Catholic mystery in that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you know.
I want to wrap myself in it for just.
I'm digressing all over the place.
Oh, come on! What are we doing here?
Barry hated my inking over him.
I remember this just popped up.
He tore me to shreds, and I couldn't disagree with him. But the conversation started. It eventually came around to the fact that we both used to play guitar and both broke our drawing hands, and somehow. That didn't quite do away with all of the shit I put over his pencils, but it was this weird bonding thing. Look, we're feral cats. People who do comedy are feral cats, and we'll look at anything to bond when we get the opportunity. Of course, we don't. We end up talking shit about it later.
There's no one I can see your line working over less effective than Barry's. Barry has such a measured, studied. I mean.
I am not a pre-Raphaelite. I mean, it's like,
You're basically a post-Xavier Pooh guy, like, by the
yeah.
I mean, Jesus, you know.
So-
No, I mean,
Right.
it's just, it doesn't mix.
I
It
mean,
would be like, it was like Woody, it would be like Woody eating Gil. Eating Neil Rabbit.
yeah, right,
I mean,
okay.
it just makes
yeah.
no sense. It's contextually weird, right?
Right.
You know?
So, but, just to go back real quick, I decided I wasn't good enough for Marvel, so I went to DC with a whole bunch of pages of like the Batman, Green Lantern, Green Arrow stuff.
Which school did you work at then?
Coletta. It was Coletta. The thing is that at the time I went, again, I lived 3 or 4 hours away in New Jersey. I baled hay. I was like, I was Lil Abner. I went in with everything I was wearing was petroleum based. I mean, there was nothing, there was no cotton, it was like, I had pants you could play chess on, you know, it was like, or checkers. Eiffel Tower tie, you know, brown, like, you know,
I remember this.
yeah, it was embarrassing.
You look like you drew yourself. No, come on. In the way that Tom Palmer looks like Jack Davis drew him,
That's true, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Come on, you know, and right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
But I went in there, there were no such thing as there are today where you need to give a blood sample, you know, and you need to have somebody like scan in your passport to be able to like let you in to like visit the editors, to just get in there.
because of course Marvel and DC are real targets of terrorism.
Right, yeah. Well, that's, at that point, I was just there. I think what finally got me in the door was that I watched the receptionist do nothing but eat all afternoon. And I think I upset her so much, she was like, you know, he's just staring at me. You know? And so I went in, Coletta actually said, I like your stuff. You'll be on the street in 2 weeks because of the implosion, whatever the
Right.
that was. He said, I'm gonna call Neil. So I went over to see to Neil at Continuity, walked over with, was it Tony Despoto? It was somebody, it was one of the guys who was up at Neil, took me over to Marvel. So I basically got a job, a career at Marvel,
Because Vinny sent you to see Neil.
because, and with a portfolio of nothing but DC superheroes. You know, I mean, and I was really just hoping to get a critique or a pinup, or like, look, kid, come back in 6 months, or don't bother. And I figured if I don't get any response at all, I can go back and finish my final year of art school, and I'll go into something else. And I literally walked out like my life had changed completely. It was one of those, you know, like big deal things that happen, you know, on rare occasions, you know. So it was pretty much of a shock for me, but it wasn't like I had planned it, you know. I was too ignorant to be afraid.
But the time where you started and evolved, were there any editors holding you back from being you, or was there a point where you were allowed just to have free reign and just go off the rails and do the stuff that we?
No, I was pretty much, I was like the Trojan horse. I came in with, you know, just wanting to do Neil stuff, and then because like I said, I'd grown up on a farm, and there were very few other kids who were into comics, none of whom knew Neil Adams. And it was like, for some reason Neil's work spoke to me, even though when I first saw it, I despised it. You know, it wasn't Kurt Swan, it wasn't comfort food.
Everybody hated it.
Yeah, right.
Because it wasn't Kurt, it wasn't Love.
Right. So, so when I started to, you know, get a lot of critique, being a clone and everything else, all of a sudden I started to feel angry and invisible, and this sense of everything I put my commitment to was somehow being called into question. And I started to feel invisible, and anger again, you cannot, you know, that sense of feeling invisible and feeling denied and feeling kind of cast aside, all of that has its place in terms of providing a great level of impetus and a catalyst for you to change. And I was like, because I was putting stuff in my sketchbooks, like fashion, I was into fashion illustration, and I said, why can't we do stuff in comics where there's like, you just see these women who are like 15 heads tall with just this, you know, this swath of just charcoal for her hair, instead of all of this other sort of anal stuff in comics. I said, why can't we do a building that is that is not drawn with a ruler, because not every building needs to be drawn with a ruler, because it's like that implies too much structure.
What you're talking about is, I believe, is the confluence of your arrival and Rain's being released. Because Scott is getting at, was there anybody trying to stop you from pushing material into a direction? And by the time you came in, you lucked out. Had you come in when I was there, with my generation, you would have been much more constrained. Because as much as Neil was respected by the time you came in, he was suspected much more so in that like late 60s, early 70s. The guys in the office liked his work, but fans hated it.
But that was all. But what you did, like with Scars and what, like and Flowers.
Source of Heaven.
Yeah, right. That like what you were doing with that was such a major influence
But
on
it didn't
me.
make any money at all. That stuff.
But
I mean,
it
what
was.
Arlen said, I stand by. Arlen Schumer, is he?
No.
I know he's not here. I took him to task for he did one of his quoting himself things. And when it comes down to it, what he said was, he denied that's what he said, but exactly what he said. He said, my function in comics in the 70s was to fail at doing graphic novels so that he could come along and do them successfully. And I, hey, fuck you, gang. Because basically my work in the 70s was irrelevant. I mean, I didn't become anything who I was until the 80s. But, you see, I never felt that I had anywhere near the handling technique that you did. And you were just there. I spent the first 10 years of my career denying the value of technique and the rest of it, just doing everything I possibly could to learn to do stuff. And it just seemed to me that you were a guy to catch up to, okay? I mean, people talk about Dave McKean. McKean's work has a beauty to it, but it lacks narrative value. Your work always has narrative value, and that's really important. As I've gotten older, comics are about pictures with narrative value. That an image has meaning beyond that its placement of character in space is the defining element of why the picture exists. And you've always done that. Even in your most abstract stuff, it's always been that narrative value.
Well,
I mean, when you were going through that Ronald Searle period, that's what I saw. Not Aragona's.
it's certainly
Yeah,
part of it. That also and wordsmith wise, I was totally also into Hunter Thompson. So that like.
I share your enthusiasm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But there were a lot of things that sort of went into the mix. But when I finally decided that I was going to just either do what I was going to do. I love this medium. I feel like this medium can handle anything. It's not just, cookie cutter stuff. It can handle fine art, it can handle abstraction, it can handle music, it can handle theater, it can handle all of it. And I'm either going to do that or I'm getting out, because it was really like that old, do it or get off the pot kind of a thing. So, and like, you may feel that what you did maybe didn't make any money, but it certainly impacted me in the sense of, like, I wanted to come and take what you had done and find my own way to make it work and again, I think a lot of it does have to do with timing and certain things, because people talk about, commitment and everything else, but there is definitely an element of luck.
Look,
and
if
timing.
you were born in what, you were born in 60?
58.
58, okay. Think if you'd been born in 30, you would have been a player at the Ladies' Home Journal.
Yeah, okay, I can see that.
I do. Oh, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Where we meet is the appreciation of a guy like Al Parker. Okay. Al Parker is, in my opinion, the greatest American illustrator of the mid-20th century ever. He was extraordinary. And as a goof, a phrase I hate using, but as a goof, in March of 1954, Parker illustrated 7 stories in an issue of Cosmopolitan in 7 different styles using 7 different pseudonyms. And it was an astonishing hat trick. And the skill set you developed in comics would have been playable there. Because Weisinger was not going to be hiring you. It's as simple as that.
Morty.
What?
I said Morty.
Thank you very much. He's too, you know, yeah. Someone else?
It's funny how I noticed coming up through the 80s, reading both of your works, you talk about narrative.
Stand up so they can hear too.
Well, I'm good. So, I never, I told you no before, and I almost got one for it. Even Bill, especially with as crazy as your work ever got.
You want a mic?
No, I'm good. As crazy as your work ever got, I always knew what I was looking at. It's the same thing with you, Howard. I was never confused. Stedman's stuff always looked kind of crazy. You mentioned another artist.
Ronald Searle.
But with you guys, because of the fundamentals of the comic art that you knew when you were younger, you talk about your first 8 years of your career not being very meaningful. Well, it obviously built to what you did with American Flag because that was the platform you built it upon.
People mistake my dismissal of that work as false modesty or self-deprecation.
No.
And what it is, it's pride in craft.
Yeah.
It's pride in getting over that bullshit and moving on to this.
Yeah, you learn.
There's a lot to be said for that.
Right.
Yes.
Comics can be an industry that can chew up and spit out younger artists, and the ones who decide that they're going to learn from any mistakes or failures or the company going under or bounce checks or whatever it is, stick with it, you know.
There are people who I'm praying are spit out. I mean, I literally get up in the morning and I write a Yorkshire candle and I say, can this guy's career slip into the ether and just disappear?
We know that deserve's got nothing to do with it.
No.
Right.
No, I mean, I got a shit list that just continues to grow. And I'll share it with you if you're really interested, but after the camera stop rolling.
The only reason I wanted to say that, Bill, is that, you know, I've met Howard before. I've never met you, but I just wanted to express my appreciation for the fact that I always knew what I was looking at. Even if the Kingpin looked like a mountain with a, you know, his tiny face and his.
Oh, you mean the Spider-Verse?
Isn't that amazing?
Your fundamental knowledge of art, I always knew what I was looking at, and I was never lost.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I mean, that's
And there were
something.
imitators.
I'm sorry?
There were imitators who tried to do what you were doing, but they didn't have the fundamental drawing ability and narrative storytelling ability.
Well,
Does that make sense?
no, I really do appreciate that. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I was trying to do the things that I did, and then to see other people coming in, sort of being influenced by me. I mean, you know, like McKean, you know. And one of the things that sort of hit me after I saw that style, you know, that stylistic arena sort of open up, was that for me, again, maybe it's because I get bored easily at a certain point. It's like, okay, I've tried this, and how does this apply? How can I apply this to a narrative form and not have it just be all about a visual just for its own sake? And one of the things that has always sort of driven me is to kind of continually go back to school. It's like Bernie Fuchs once said, the thing that interests him is the effect of light on objects, and that to capture that. And at the end of the day, it's like, you can try all kinds of wild techniques, you can try all kinds of abstractions, but the simple ability to draw someone in and make them feel something that resonates there's a beauty to that and a universality to it, and I kind of feel like at the end of the day to go back and just, you know, dig in again, because, you know, the idea of learning, continually learning.
Because it's like you're communicating not just with a giant audience, you're communicating one-on-one with the reader.
But that's the subjective nature of what we're talking about.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Right.
It's something that, I mean, I talked about this earlier. I mean, that engaging with you, the reader, is for me at least the biological imperative for what we do. And it's just, it astonishes me, and here I am, here's the old man yelling, get off my lawn, that we now have, and which is at least two generations of talent who have, for my money, lost the connection to that relationship with the reader.
You talk about the reader being the engine.
Exactly.
Driving.
That's precisely what I said, yes. And I believe that with all my heart. I mean, there's a reason pagination exists, that you cannot put a surprise on a right-handed page. I mean, because you're turning the page. You know, it's like, and one of the things that I learned in doing the seminar on Marvel as many years as I did was just the hobbyist nature of the people who are attracted to the business. That calling also applies to people who come in and seem to forget that the minute they start taking money from people, they're professionals now, and they're cogs, and they are part of a corporate structure. And like it or not, tough shit. You know, it's the way it is. If you don't want to, you can do your own stuff. You know, I find it fascinating that there are two Van Skyvers working in comics. It's Ethan Van Skyver and there's no events guy. They're brothers, apparently. Not a joke. I just found this out recently. I believe this is true. I believe this is true. And if you know Ethan's work and his ethos, and if you know Noah's work and his ethos, it is staggering to me. You know, and I've just recently become acquainted with Noah Van Skyver's work. I didn't. I mean, for me, he's like he's a modern day equivalent of what Chester Brown might have evolved into had he not gotten off the deep end about some bizarre obsessions. And I love the engagement his work has with the audience. I really do. It makes me crazy. It makes me want to learn more about that kind of stuff, knowing full well that technically it's completely unavailable to me. I don't have that capacity for self-revelation. I will always mask autobiography because I'm not. I mean, I used to be good looking enough to be a narcissist. Now I'm just a soloist. And and it's hard because I just don't want to. I want to do stuff that's honest and true, but I also don't feel that my own personal story is as interesting as it should be.
But metaphor is a great place to do that. You've always been honest and true.
Well, yeah, but I'm working on the second and third arc of Take Kids. And the second arc involves people who aren't dead. That's gonna fuck me up. Seriously, because I can say lots of shit about people who are dead. Because I subscribe to the Sondheim method, which is always speak ill of the dead because they can't defend themselves and you can't hurt their feelings. But I'm already working on those conflations, and I'm trying to figure out how to conflate him because he shows up at the end of the second arc, but not him, but him and the essence of what he represented. What I said earlier about what he represented, and I'm not sure whether I will include myself. I don't know because I'm already in the first arc. I'm there, but I learned some. I watched the Gary Groth interview that Ben Saunders did a couple of years ago over the EC archive stuff they're doing, and I learned something from that I hadn't connected before. From a snide crack, which I will not tell you about, but I'll tell him later. About a guy whose work we admire, and okay, that's something to be used. And I'm amazed and appalled at the capacity for narcissism that exists on the non-mainstream side of comics.
Is it because it's so small?
Pardon me?
Is it because it's so small?
I don't know. I tried to read Fun Home, and I just wanted to punch the book in the face. Why? No, it's insufferable. The musical's worse. I like musicals. Sorry, now I feel terrible about myself. Yes?
Bill, question. What is if there is a hold up on doing a collection of memorial portraits that you share online, like a high quality?
Oh, hey, Glenn.
Hey.
Sorry, my.
No, I came in a few minutes late.
It's all right. No, there's discussions about it. I'm working right now with a publishing company that has worked with Museum of Modern Art. So they're doing 3 volumes of my stuff. And the first one is sort of a retrospective. Second is, I think, culling from about 50 or 60 sketchbooks that I have. And then the third one may be about the memorial portraits. Again, I never did any of those for any other reason than to do them. So it wasn't anything that I had thought about, but there may be at some point.
Okay.
Yeah. Omar.
Wanted to ask you, when did you guys meet each other? What was you guys' first initial thoughts on each other?
I remember meeting him at a party that was hosted by Larry Hama when Band Dessiné with Larry and Gary, and we were fucked up.
Okay, well, it's interesting, because my first recollection of actually meeting you, that may have been where we actually spent some time together,
right.
But the first time I met you was actually when Joe Rubenstein brought me over to Upstart. And yeah, he opened up, and
I don't remember Joe ever being there.
Yeah, okay, well, he came in, he introduced me, and then you said, I like your shit. And I went, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And you looked at me and you looked at Joe and goes, is he for real? Yeah.
No memory, but again, I was a drug addict at the time, so I take complete life.
It was like you looked at me like stuff, what is this? What kind of idiot?
It's because you were raised on a farm and didn't know that shit meant stuff.
No, I was also, I couldn't take a compliment also.
Like taking yes for an answer.
Yeah,
Tell me
exactly.
what Upstart was.
Upstart, yeah, that was, yeah. But,
Upstart was the bargain basement version of the studio. The studio was Kaluta, Wrightson, Jones, and Smith, Windsor Smith. And,
oh, that's the other thing we bonded over. I'm also Windsor Sienkiewicz, which is actually another thing we bonded over. I forgot to mention that, but I digress. Continue.
And it's me and Walter. The original was me, Walter, Val Myrick, and Jim Starlin. And Val decided to leave, and didn't bother telling anybody. He said, Jim Sherman's moving in next week, so here he is, Jim Sherman. I had no idea. Frank Miller ended up replacing Starlin. And this was the late 70s to the mid 80s. Simonson had this huge drawing table, which I think he still has. Literally 5 feet wide, 4 feet high. And he works like this. Walter has never dipped a pen into an ink bottle in his life.
He said he stopped that.
Really?
He said,
holy
shit. Because that's one of the things.
Right?
Okay, like,
Go ahead,
this is geeky,
this is
geeky
yes.
fan stuff. He used to, like, dip
A Sable, a Series 7 Sable.
Right. But he would also use a 102 Hunt 102 crow quill, and he would actually take the ink dropper, squeeze some ink through it, hold the pen laterally, and just drip in some ink, and then go back, and then continue.
Never did drugs. Never. Has had 3 pina coladas and 2 beers. In total. Right? I mean, and he didn't finish the last pina colada. Okay.
So he said, but he says he recently, I think he's sort of like...
This is like the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Really? Oh, please, don't get me started. Schwartz, you're now, first this guy. You're not Schwartz, but stand up anyway.
Okay. So you guys brought up Hunter S. Thompson, your disagreement over that. And it just got me thinking how of course, any discussion about comics talks about comic books, but how important is it to you to use, like, or to draw inspiration or references from other sources, like movies, novels, the news, whatever, television? How often do you do that?
I think Bill and I are the living incarnations of precisely that. I really do.
I do think that there are areas of overlap, and I think there are areas of absolute exclusivity and mutual exclusive. I think you're far more into your awareness of guys like Hammett, and in the whole
that's 40 years old now.
Right.
I mean, for me, I'm deeply influenced by musical theater, usually so, and I'm very serious about that. Frank Lesser is as much an influence on me as a writer as Alan First or Elmer Leonard. I realized recently how much of an influence Fritz Leiber was on the way I think about humor. Okay, but in terms of picture making, I look at everything. I really do.
It's amazing what kind of goes in there. You can't turn it off. It's just whatever you're looking at, whatever you're experiencing. Like there's some way that this is going to link in. I was going to ask you, what is the oddest reference or influence that if you were to tell them who it is, that people would go like, I never would have heard that. I never would have believed that.
It's probably Lesser. What are you pointing to?
See the marching on the Arctic Trail?
Yeah, what about it?
Where'd you get that from?
This is David. I gave you that piece of reference Armstrong. White guy wants to hear it. Okay. That's from a book that David gave me about life under the occupation in Paris. I like pictures, and I like that stuff. But Lesser would be the answer. For me, Guys and Dolls is as close as America's ever gotten to perfect art. I feel the same way about Most Happy Fella and How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And his sense of the vernacular just kills me. And we were discussing doing Black Kiss 3, and I wanted to do it as a parody of musicals. And I realized I didn't have the talent for that, so I couldn't do it. Because I'm not Larry Siegel, from Mad. But I really wanted to. Because I wanted to do literal 10-page long parodies of musicals in filth. And do pornographic versions of West Side Story, Guys and Dolls, seriously. Sometimes you just got to come up with something else to do to keep you excited.
about like someone like a Billy Wilder?
Yeah, you know, except for someone like an Aunt, no, and Sally 17. No, you're right, everything. Thinking about it, you know. It's true, you know. No, you're right, you're right. Well, because Holden, I mean, like the three archetypes are, you know, William Holden, Jane Fonda, and James Garner.
Right.
You know, and Garner, when you were talking, when you know, the fact, born 20 years after the fact, there's a wonderful piece by Clive James about James Garner reviewing his biography, his autobiography, and he talks about Garner, why Garner didn't become a movie star, and Clint Eastwood and Stephen King did, and it's an astonishing piece of work. It really is. I like Clive James a lot, and to a great extent, that Wilder does represent that kind of snarky new American. You know, I mean, I was thinking about it. We tried to watch Grand Hotel last night, and my wife couldn't bear it. And but I'm watching this, and I'm thinking of Garbo and Ninotchka, you know, and just
Yeah.
Wilder. Okay. Yeah.
What about jazz for you? Yeah, I mean,
Well,
yeah.
No, you know, it's Lester Young and Charlie Parker, and Count Basie to connect, and of course all the vocalists, all singers, Eddie Jefferson, King Pleasure. There I go, there I go, there I go, there I go.
Right. Well, that's why.
And you?
Well, the reason I'm kind of curious about Parker, because Parker was, you know, all about just.
Man.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, and the same thing with I'm blanking on his name. Shit. Like, forget it. No, it's another saxophonist, but I'm blanking on.
What era?
After Parker.
Like Ornette Coleman, John Coltrane?
Coleman and Coltrane.
I got my grandson to sing A Love Supreme with me this weekend. A Love Supreme. Come on, Rocky, do it. A Love Supreme. There's nothing like a 9-year-old kid from Mill Valley, California, singing A Love Supreme with you. It's the best. Him I don't embarrass. That was fun. Yeah. 7-year-old, that guy. Yeah, first Schwartz, then you.
Two questions. Bill, when you talked about going up to DC that first time, just what year was that?
I think it was 1980.
That late?
I think it was like maybe even 79 or 80. Yeah, I think
you went earlier than that.
No, I just turned. I think it was June of 80.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and what I want to ask both of you is the way you do panels is really unconventional when you compare it to when you're talking about Kurt Swan, Murphy Anderson, or the Marvel guys. They're just like 6 panels a page, very simple. Were the editors you're dealing with when you started to do that? Was there pushback on them that they didn't want it? I mean, were there editors that did? Because like Bill, I see some of the pages you're doing; they're so great, and then I see editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, and I'm like, how did that happen? How did that guy let that happen?
Vinnie Coletta.
Huh?
Yeah.
Help keeping Jim occupied and distracted.
Well, yeah, I mean,
No, that came later. Oh yeah. Oh my God. Talk about Hollywood Babylon, comic book Babylon.
That shows up in volume 3.
Yeah, I mean there were more things. I mean I remember going to Vinnie Coletta's house in New Jersey, and it was I don't know if Nixon was a neighbor at some point with him, but Vinnie was like he wanted to be the art director up at Marvel, and
wasn't
he came very close to it. It was Mike Hobson. Well, what happened was Vinnie was going around to all the editors saying, it's like you're basically screwing over Jim, like big time. He goes, and when I'm the art director, you're out of here. He was like basically threatening everybody.
He was like Paulie Walnuts.
Yeah, right.
No,
it's absolutely true. He was a low level. I think he was like a bookie or something.
But that's exactly the character he played in The Office.
Right. Yeah.
He did.
Yeah. Right. And the thing is that he was so certain that he had the job down that it was actually Hobson at the time who called him and said, "You're not getting the job. It's like Marvel cannot be associated with
people such as yourself."
That's right. Yeah. It's like the mob kind of thing.
The pushback you're talking about happens today, not then. The companies are much more conservative now than they were then.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Shooter was actually, Jim got a lot of crap, a lot of heat, but he used to bust my chops all the time, but he was the first person to say, go do your thing, Also, one thing that you don't see anymore is if you do a piece of art and they go and they make a lunchbox of it, or they go and they make a Happy Meal or whatever, paying for something twice. They, if you do a cover, it's like, and they make a T-shirt out of it, all of that stuff. Jim would go upstairs to the powers that be and say, you got to pay the guy again for a job that was, that he's already done it. Like, pay him again, and they would. You don't see that at all now. I mean, at all. So things have gotten much more conservative.
Both companies, mostly because neither company has any artists working as editors. I mean, the firing of Mark Chiarello 2 months ago shocked everybody, but it was no surprise to people like because I think the reason that he was fired is because no one knows what an art director does in the context of comics. Comics has become ridiculously a writer alpha medium, which is absurd. And there are three main reasons for this. We've had this conversation. The editors themselves have no real understanding of visual narrative. Their criticisms are filtered entirely through a literary screen. And what you've got is three things. A, the 90s, when comics were completely sensation-based without narrative. Two, with all due respect, the curiosity and the level of interest of the reader has diminished dramatically. How many grown men and women in this room are spending too much fucking time reading Mockingjay and Harry Potter novels? And three, sorry, but grow up. And stop reading that shit. It's children's books. They're called chapter books for kids. Stop it. And three, it is in the interest of the representation and management classes to identify the writer as a creative force in the material, and the artist as an unfortunately necessary but unpleasant adjunct to the writer's creative experience. Because those guys can identify the skill set required to write. They may not be able to write, but they know what a keyboard looks like. They can sort of get the idea. But when it comes to us, we are regarded as shamans. There's a reason why the chief runs the room and the shaman works for the chief. And Gil always said that he felt that he was a wolf being held at bay by a torch. And I can see what he's talking about. The writer in comics is the alpha, and the reason that a company like Image is so successful right now is because it's an IP factory for writers. I think I'm one of the few guys at Image who actually writes and draws his own stuff. So I'm sort of caught. I'm in the middle there, and having done both things for a living, I have a genuine distaste for these. Every time I read in Deadline when some writer refers to the person with whom they collaborate as their artist, like I talk about my lunch. And I just, the fact of the matter is, comic book writing is not typing. Comic book writing is a collaborative experience between a writer and an artist. And when you react to the quality of the writing in a comic book, what you're actually reacting to is the execution of the writer's template by the artist. So, shut up, all you guys.
Also, the one other big thing that is part and parcel now is that it really isn't about storytelling. It's about IP. It's really about how can we take this and turn it into a ride, turn it into maybe a movie or something. But it's really not about the comics per se at all.
And I rather like comic books.
Yeah.
I mean, I consider myself very lucky in that I left New York the day before I turned 35 because I had no prospects, as we discussed. Because I'm not a star in comics. Despite the fact that it refers to me as a star, I'm a legend. Thank you very much. And in that regard, I realized I had to find another income stream because I was going to get this old and I had no idea how I was going to support myself. I did not want to be a drain on the state. I'm on the board of the Hero Initiative, and you have no idea how difficult it is occasionally for me to have to deal with people who treated me with contempt when I was in my 20s and 30s, who not come there with their hands out. And I'm a Democrat. So yeah, wow. We'll name names later. And so I'm grateful for the fact that I found another income stream, because I never could have had the life that I live today in comics, because I'm not a crowd pleaser. I'm an acquired taste. Had I done what I did on Flag and Times Square on Batman or Superman, there's potential that would be a bigger name. But I never would have been able to get away with those things on those established characters. You couldn't do that. It could not be done. Ned Kahn always gave me shit for not doing Flag for DC Comics, and I said, that's absurd. DC would never have published the book as I delivered it, because it needed a company without baggage. It needed to be in a place where there was no history whatsoever, that it could establish itself alone, because it existing alongside Superman and Batman specific idea, which it lacked and desperately wanted to avoid at that point. Downside of that, of course, is that it became material that influenced a big part of the talent pool, but didn't reach the audience. And I spent more time than I care to admit explaining to schmucks interviewing me that you might want to do your research before you talk to me next time. That no, I didn't get that from him, he got that from me. And now I'm tired of sounding like a bitter old fucking Jew. Just saying. You know?
Yeah, that you know, the provenance in terms of what comes first. That's the other thing, is that I think people tend to forget the linear aspect of it. That there are things that actually happen in a very much a chronological point, way. But I think what you were saying about I'm blanking on what your point was.
Being pushed back from them.
Well, yeah, when you started, I assumed there'd be more pushback from the guys who've been there since the 40s.
But they weren't around anymore. They were gone. By the time I think.
I thought you were talking more mid-70s, when there's people like Julie Schwartz and Mort Leinzinger still around.
They weren't the only guy that Julie wanted to work with was Dave Copper. Dave was Julie's favorite artist, because he reminded him of Murphy Anderson. We weren't working for those guys, ever. You know, you work for Danny, you work for Archie, you work for younger guys who were willing to take a shot. Of all people, what's his name? Christ, what's his name? The guy that the awful little terrier. He was my first job. Joe Orlando was another name. He was not the terrier. Joe was a genuine guy. But those guys never had anything to do with us. You were never first tier. I was never first tier. They weren't going to let us do Superman or Batman. You know, when Giordano comes over to DC from Charlton, he brings Aparo, who's the perfect guy. And Aparo was the perfect cautionary tale. Milgram spent 5 years trying to get Aparo to come over to work at Marvel. But Aparo mistook his loyalty to Giordano for his loyalty for DC. When Giordano was gone, Aparo's just smoke. Just disappears.
Yeah, well, speaking of apparel, there was a point when, and again, this is part of my issue with comics, that there is no gold watch in the medium. You know, it's like you're pretty much on that treadmill, and they pay you just enough to kind of just keep churning it out. And so I was actually doing finishes over Jim Aparo.
What is this?
In the 80s,
Batman?
Batman stuff, yeah. They
That
must
must have been look fabulous.
well, what's interesting about it is that they came to me.
Who was writing? Skates or Danny?
I don't recall. I really don't recall. But I do know that they wanted me, because at that point he'd been in business for so long, and this is something that happens. You even saw it with Kirby, you saw it with Buscema. Stuff starts to skew. It starts to get wonky. They just don't have either the vision, the eyesight anymore, or the enthusiasm. It's like they're just putting the stuff out there. And these are the people who sort of built the business, built the medium in a lot of ways, who should be treated with a lot more respect. I mean, certainly that's the way I feel about it. But when
give that shit up.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is, when they actually came to me and they said, we want you to do finishes over stuff, and they said, can you fix a lot of what he does? It's kind of wonky.
Was it wonky?
It was getting kind of wonky, yeah. A lot of that sort of he had a little bit of a Neil Adams thing happening. A lot of that went by the wayside. It sort of became this sort of blocky, flattened out kind of thing that was going on. So, and actually, I never met Jim, but we did have a conversation one time. We spent about an hour and a half on the phone talking, and we talked about everything. It was really actually, great. The only thing I really do remember about the whole thing was at the end of the conversation, he said, I have a favor to ask of you. And I said, you name it. He said, stop fucking with my faces. And I said, okay. And I called up the editor, and I said, pencil is prerogative. It's like, you hired me to fix his drawings, quote, fix, and he wants me to be more respectful of what he's doing. And pretty much right after that, there wasn't any more work from him. It was almost like that was the end of the whole thing. Just acknowledging I was going to follow his request, and that was it. That was all she wrote.
Fine, what do you got, Tom?
Hi there, for both or either of you. Was there any particular project or turning point that you changed your perspective of yourself as an artist from struggling artist to pro, or that you're most proud of? Or?
I could like put that to bed right now. It's always a struggle. I'm sorry. It's like it just never stops. You know, it just never ends. It's like there's no romance at all.
I mean, for me, it was flagging, because I realized that I had something to say that I could do. But I don't, I mean, I think what he's talking about, you're always working hard, because you end up competing with yourself.
Right.
But, you know, for me, the thing about flag is I set a bar for myself that screwed me. You know, because I could never go back. And it would be real, I mean.
No, it was a game changer.
But I also, the fact is, this is my job. I mean, I know comic book enthusiasts hate to hear this shit. But the reality is, we get paid to do this, and I get up in the morning, and when we started this conversation earlier, I said that one of the separating factors of the generation precedes us is that bitterness. And I don't think you're a bitter guy. I don't think I'm not a bitter guy. I mean, I'm bitter about other things. I'm mostly bitter about, about the fact that I resent other people their money more than anything else. I envy very few people's work. Do I envy? I envy the fact that I'd really like to be making a living, testing artisanal macaroni and cheese, and be able to do my work on the side.
Sure.
But I mean, I kind of like. I'm a crossword puzzle guy. I do puzzles. I can't read at night. I have to do puzzles at night because narrative gets me worked up. And I do only Thursday through Sunday because the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is bullshit. Come on, right? New York Times, Monday, come on, cat. It's like a TV guide puzzle. And I feel that way about doing comics today. That's how I feel about comics. I feel like comics today have more in common with map making, cartography, and schematics. Finding ways to deliver narrative imagery in ways that is appealing, that has some clarity, but is also obscurantist in places. Because my feeling is, there are other people who are there to lap it to the audience, and I'm not here for that. Somebody pointed out, and I was like, well, yeah, that I'll do stuff that characters do that isn't laid out in the text.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of guys don't. I know you do.
Well, there's a lot of, there's so much subtext.
It's like Willie Elder.
Yeah.
It's like Elder.
Right.
You look at Elder's, Willie Elder? No?
Well,
No?
EC.
No? Who does not know who Willie Elder is? Really? He fucked up his career by spending 25 years doing Lil Laney fame. But before that, he was an astonishing talented man, and on the war books. And he was maybe Kurtzman's greatest collaborator. They were best friends, and his humor stuff was packed with what he called chicken fat. It was all this stuff happened in the background that he just added for fun. He was apparently a very eccentric guy. I met him a couple of times. I made no impression on him because I was young and he didn't give a shit about me. But anecdotally, he was crazy. And that craziness showed up on the page. He once, in the middle of the Depression, when money was tight, he found a package of meat that had fallen off a butcher truck. And rather than bringing it home to feed his family, he stole clothes off a clothesline and scattered the meat and the clothes along a railroad track and started yelling, "Mikey! Mikey!" That's fucking nuts. Yeah.
That's making it into kids' comics.
What's that?
So that should make it into kids' comics.
That's a commitment. That is a commitment. So, there you go.
Well, I guess, to get to what Ted was saying, I think all along the way with me, with coming in with Moon Knight had a very specific, that was cutting my eye teeth, so to speak. And with the Adams routine, then pushing into the New Mutants, I felt like I was trying some stuff with all of the other influences in black and white. Then when I did Elektra, that was like, I wanted to do painted covers and painted interiors, because I hadn't really had, again, you had done it with the graphic novels, but I wanted to do it in a monthly comic that was actually about a superhero stuff, like doing it in that, thanks for coming.
Ben Schwartz, ladies and gentlemen, Ben Schwartz. And
then, for me, Straight Toasters was my, I wanted to just write and draw, tell my own thing. And again, the response I got from, from the U.S. when Toasters came out here in the States, they'd have these, I think, 4 old ladies. Like it was some magazine that would have like, like it wasn't quite 4 stars, but it would have this. It was a unit of 4, like 4.
I'm liking for old ladies.
Yeah, well, it was. I think it was.
I like that it is
It
for
was.
old
It
ladies.
was. But I got 4 question marks. It was like here in the
Like,
States.
what the fuck, what the
Yeah,
fuck,
what the fuck? Yeah. But it was. But Toasters were reviewed by the London Sunday Times Book Review, which and it was actually this amazingly positive. Like it shows the adult, particularly adult, potential of the form. And I'm like. Because I never felt like I was not a superhero writer, but I felt like I love the idea of complexity and writing stuff that in the same way that I guess that the way I approach my artwork, I feel like my words are probably about as much of a full, fully compatible with that. It's like as far as writing a monthly superhero thing, I don't think I could do that.
And I'm in awe of someone who can. I mean, again, referring to this essay, which I'll be quoting, probably medium. The journal is probably going to publish it as well. I have no interest whatsoever in superhero comic books as a reader. I haven't in years. I find them adolescent and insipid, and I don't care whether you like them or not. You're welcome to do whatever you like. But I am genuinely in awe of anyone who can find anything new to say about this shit. Because it is just, I mean, it's 80 years of this junk, and it boils down to, as I said, the Roadrunner and Coyote. It's Batman chasing the Joker, but never catching him. Superman, Luthor, Spider-Man, we got Green Goblin. It's just endless, And I'm sitting on an airplane, and I'm watching the Everybody Dies movie, but not really moving, over a guy's shoulder, and I'm realizing that this is paradigm of comics. That there's no consequences, there's no real context for consequences, and that I can't participate in that as a professional and take it seriously. But I am stunned at anyone who can step up to the plate and say, I'm going to write Superman for the next couple of years.
But thanks to your viewpoint, we get comics like Twilight.
Yeah, maybe. But John Byrne also said that I had raped an entire aspect of the DC universe.
What?
Word, man.
That's my favorite thing you ever done.
Really?
Yeah.
You like JGL stuff, huh?
Well, yeah.
He's pretty gorgeous, isn't he?
Oh, my God.
Remember, if comics were a meritocracy,
Yeah.
he would actually be taken
What's your
seriously.
dialogue, actually? I don't mean to derail the whole thing, but the way you wrote, the way they spoke, every character in there had their own unique voice.
That's
And it had an ending.
Thank you, comic books, but that's the reality. I mean, comic books have conditioned you people to read shit. because it flatters you for liking it. It's like television used to be. Television used to be a medium that congratulated you for being too hip for television. And as soon as they had you convinced of that, it had you by the balls. And mainstream comic books are fatuous and credulous and depend on your fatuousness and your credulity. Okay? They depend on you still loving the shit you loved when you were 13. They depend on you being willing to accept creations of 15-year-old boys aimed at not quite so talented and skilled 15-year-old boys with a slather of gravitas to make you feel like you're reading an adult product. The guy dresses up like a bondage freak, beating the shit out of people he doesn't know in the middle of the night. He had a bad day when he was 8. Okay? The guy has power beyond, of mortal men, okay? And he comes down and he's nice. Really? Come on. What do you think would really happen if he came down here? What would he wouldn't wear that red cape? No. Well, anecdotally, I mean, I was back when Jeanette was in D.C., they wanted to regroup the superheroes, the lead characters. They were going to, Alan, Frank, and I were asked to come in and pitch Superman. Alan was going to do The Adventures of Superman, Frank was going to do action, I was going to do the third book. And I pitched my version of Superman. You want to hear my pitch?
Yes.
Okay. You okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. It's the first 3 pages, it's a series of multi-panel pages as Metropolis awakens. The alarm clocks go off. Everybody's waking up in Metropolis. The city's beginning. It's just, you set the city. It's the city. It's everything. Because it's not New York, it's Chicago. Metropolis in my head is Chicago, no matter what you think. Because that's the city that Siegel and Schuster do. And it's getting, and the buses are moving, and everybody's waking up. And then you have like 4 or 5 pages of these multiple, and then all of a sudden, everybody looks up at a 9-panel page, as you begin to hear, speaking of Frank Lesser, you've got the cool, clear eyes of a seeker of wisdom and truth. Slightly off key. And as you turn the page, there's Superman, flying across above Metropolis with a Walkman on. And he's singing along to How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. He flies to the Daily Planet, he gets into the Daily Planet to the storage closet, dresses up, and then we realize as he interacts with Lois and Jimmy and Perry and everybody else, everybody in Metropolis knows that Clark Kent is Superman. But they're not going to let him know they know. Because they really like the idea of having Superman in Metropolis. Needless to say, I was shunted out of the room. Okay. See, that's a Superman I can dig. A guy who was, all right, it's Superman by Tom DeHaven. Who's read it? Not
I bought it.
What,
I bought it because of you, but I haven't read it.
Who's bought it and read it?
I read it.
All right, okay. Made me cry halfway across the country. Because it brought back to me what it was about superhero comic books that I loved when I was 12 years old. Okay, I called Tom DeHaven when I got home and I said, if anybody adapts this thing, I'd kill to be that guy. But then again, I wouldn't do as good. You know who would do a great job on that? Chris Samney. He would do a fabulous job on that. Okay. But all that romance has been sucked out of superhero comic books by the need to make it relevant and adult. It should be morally idiotic at its core. It's what made that stuff so perfect and beautiful when we were kids. Okay? Instead, you've got adult problems of like the guys who run around dressed in super suits. I'm sorry. Stop. Yes?
But is that a flaw of...
Yes. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be facetious. I'm sorry.
Hey, thanks.
No, go ahead. Please, go ahead.
Is that a flaw, what you just said, is that a flaw of the genre itself, just
Yes.
inherent?
I think it is.
Or is it a function of the current editorial?
No, I think it is. I think it is a function of the material itself. I really do. I think that the very nature of adolescent, satisfaction fantasies, which is what we're talking about here. First of all, for the most part, these characters are projections of a 15-year-old boy's idea of adulthood. Grown men and women, when confronted with the idea of dressing like that in public, do not behave that way. Okay, they have shame. They have a sense of self. They have a sense of awareness. A 15-year-old boy's idea of how an adult behaves is how these characters behave. Okay, I do comic books because of superhero comic books. That's all I really wanted to do. I love this stuff so much. Batman in my head is drawn by Dick Sprang. And Superman in my head is drawn by Jack Burnley. Okay? And it's not a realistic guy, it's a cartoon. And like, I can watch the Fleischer cartoons now with my grandsons and still get goose pimples and go berserk. From the endless reaches of space, where there once glowed a planet known as Krypton, that burned like a glowing star in the distance. I can get almost all of it out. L, IAB, IAP, IS, which is the initials for look, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. How pathetic is that? Okay. So this is not contempt prior to investigation. This is contempt with investigation. Okay. This is me calling out to wishing to God, the God I don't believe in, that there was more to genre material than just these guys running around in masks and capes fighting crime for no particular reason. Okay. David, you got a finger up in the air. You got a
So
question?
it leads to my next question.
Which is?
Do you guys follow European comics and the stuff that they're printing, and have you been approached by them to be able to do original material? Huh?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of European stuff, and I'm actually having some discussions about doing some stuff European. But what you're bringing up is sort of what I want to get to with you, and I want to hear your answer as well. But
by the way, sorry for the screen.
No, it actually begs the question because there's the medium of comic, because I still love this medium and what it's capable of. But you reminded me of what, I think a number of people here have heard about the whole Bill Maher thing. Have you heard about it?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So I was going to say that you're pretty much, because he got...
No, but he wasn't talking about comic books. He wasn't talking about comic books at all. He was talking about the movies. He doesn't know what they were comic. He barely knows comic books exist.
Okay, well, I mean.
Comic book movies have taken over the world. I mean, let's face it. Here's the only genius in comics today is Kevin Feige. Kevin Feige has taken in 10 years' time. It's two of these. 10 years' time has monetized to the tune of billions, material based on source material that 99.99% of the people buying those tickets have any idea exists, and if they do, they couldn't give a fuck. They just don't give a damn. The comic book movie is the engine that Bill Maher was talking about.
Okay.
I doubt he has even the conscious awareness of the existence of the product we're talking about. Look, there are only 250,000 people of us in the United States. That's right. When John Cassaday's and Jason Aaron's Star Wars #1 came out, I had lunch with Bob Wayne that day, and Bob is one of my oldest friends, and that was the first topic of news. And before either of us, it was like one of those Ted Koch moments. We said, "So 4 copies each, or what?" You know, because they sold 1 million copies. And yeah, that's what it's all about. You know, so he wasn't talking about the comics. He doesn't know comics. You know, Maher.
Well, no, that's.
I mean, and first of all, getting worked up about what Bill Maher thinks.
No. I totally agree with you, but it did, if you followed any of it on social, you saw how much of a
Because their feeling was hurt. That's really it. Because their cherishment was being assaulted. And you know, when did what anybody else thinks of what you like mean shit to you? I mean, I get up every morning and I say to myself, reminding myself that what you think of me is none of my business. And it's really difficult, but it's really good. You know, if you feel the need to defend your taste as some guy on TV, you start questioning your tastes. Fuck him. Who cares what he thinks? You know, Christ. For God's sake. All those Christ and God's sakes. Hey, baby. Who cares? You know? I mean, I love TV. Okay? And I like a lot of stuff. But I don't think it's getting good because I like it. You know, I like pizza. I had great pizza at lunch, at dinner time. It's not good. It's pizza. You know, right?
European comics.
But the problem with European comics is that for the most part, they lack the energy of the better genre material of American comics. I mean, the best European comics have a state. Look, Tacconi, okay, Giardino, okay, yeah, Giardino. Giardino is what Mobius would have been like if he went to work for Giorgé instead of Gigi.
Oh my God.
Right? Right? Am I right? Think about it. You know Vittorio Giardino? Right. Giardino is astonishing. His work is staid. His range of character is unfucking believable. But there's no capes and shit in this. And it's rather staid and quiet. But it is rife with character and rife with drama. Fernando Tacconi, you know? Tacconi's the closest to American. That's because he was working for Fleetwood's all the time. You know? But most of the European stuff is really badly written. Their writing is terrible. It's worse than ours, and we suck. Okay? So that is an issue. You know? I mean, I hate translated stuff anyway. You know, that girl with the spider tattoo, how many times have people get run over by a truck? You know? Changing the subject. Hi, John. Welcome back. You missed everything. Somebody else? You.
Yeah, could you elaborate a little bit more about what you talked about by the subjective experience or encounter that the audience should have when confronting a page of comic book art? It was something, and it was something you champion of. You explain.
A character literally looking out of the page and looking at you, acknowledging your existence. It's the antithesis. I mean, in a movie that doesn't work. Breaking the fourth wall is a terrible idea. And I'm not talking about Deadpool and tacos and all the chimichangas bullshit. You know, I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking more about literally the character identifying your presence, not looking off to the side, you know, but identifying you as a part of the experience. You know, it's like a close-up on a page has several functions to give you a deeper sense of detail on what this character looks like. It's also there to tell you how that character feels and how you should feel about what that character is experiencing. And that's heightened when that character makes eye contact with you. Does that make sense?
Are you talking about situations where the character's speaking to the audience?
Yes.
Or staged?
Not speaking to the audience, but staged in such a way that character is looking out at you,
Okay.
okay? Not looking off to the side, not being oblique, but engaging.
So
Yes.
you're talking about the character is still engaged with the people within the
Yes,
world,
but
the gaze
visually,
outward.
yes. I mean, this book I mentioned earlier, there was nothing but middle distance shots. Everything was brown. All the characters looked alike. There was no physical connection. There was no behavior of their bodies. Okay. I mean, I talk with my hands. You know? We're both active people. You know, we both represent a tradition of paying attention. I mean, I spend enormous parts of my life watching people. I eat alone frequently because my wife won't eat alone. And I watch people while they're behaving. And I love this stuff because it picks up. It gives me character moments and character business. I'm looking at this room full of people. You know, some of you were thinking, some of you were like looking like, what the fuck? And it's fun for me. This is where my pleasure arrives. And that relationship between the text and the reader can never be overestimated. It's important. It really is.
So there's a life
Yes.
beyond the page.
Yes, exactly. That you're made a participant in the material. You know, when it happens in a movie, I mean, have you ever seen The Lady in the Lake with Robert Montgomery playing Philip Marlowe? It's terrible. It's a film shot completely subjectively. Okay, the camera is Philip Marlowe. It is awful. It completely wastes a wonderful actor in Robert Montgomery. Okay, but the female lead is the best name ever. Her name is Audrey Totter. Great name for an actress. But that subjectivity works really beautifully in comics. Okay, so Jack, do you have something?
Yes. So I read all your stuff, both of you, in the 80s and everything.
When you were a boy.
I was a boy. And I got through reached the end of the decade. Comics were getting, more mature. There's all this great stuff going on. And I was, Alan Moore, it's wanted to stop doing superheroes. I was thrilled. I was like, great, I'll go with that. And then everything in the 90s, it was like everybody doubled down on superheroes. And the only kind of things that interested me, because I still wanted to read, genre material, DC would do the Elseworlds books. And, so I pick up stuff like Thrill Killer and that kind of thing. Always wishing, I was like, man, I wish I could read this without the Batman stuff in it. Because I liked it, but I just didn't,
Sometimes you start taking the job you get.
No, I understand.
You know, don't you ever feel that way? Do you ever feel that that sometimes you just got to do a job that pays the mortgage?
Oh, yeah, those are.
Yeah, no, I'm not blaming.
Oh, I don't feel blamed. I'm above suspicion today.
I love all of that stuff, but at the same time, I'm like, it'd be nice to have pirate stories without, fucking Superman in it or whatever. So I remember expecting that there was going to be stuff like the book that you had planned at one time, April in Paris.
Right.
Set in Paris, set in.
Drawn by Dennis
Paris,
Cowan.
What's that?
It was going to be drawn by Dennis Cowan.
Oh, I thought you were going to.
No, Dennis and I talked about it some night. Why isn't he here?
I don't know.
I'm sorry. I just called Dennis Cowan a fuck. What? You don't like Cowan? No, he's a great guy. Okay. Nah, Dennis is a sport.
Just like you, I'm a Brooklyn person. I got my own opinions.
Welcome to it. I'm not here to convince you, but from my perspective and from my colleague's perspective,
When I was
Dennis
at
is a sport.
SBA and back in the 80s and 90s, he was a jerk.
But he was a kid. He's a grown man now.
I've seen him too.
All right, whatever. So
We love
you.
We love you, Dennis.
You answered a lot of my question in a couple of answers already, but your growing hatred of some of the creators, and you said you're Lucy's girl.
Oh, it's getting bigger every day. You're not on it, so it's okay.
I appreciate that.
You knew that. You knew that going in.
I find, and I don't know if you agree, that a lot of it, for me, and why I don't love a lot of comics anymore, is because it went from a storytelling genre to people who now want to draw a bunch of cool pictures.
But that's the
They
recipe
want
of
the
the 90s.
storytelling aspect. Like, I grew up learning about storytelling and hopefully drawing it in a interesting way. And I feel that a lot of people now have grown up looking at artists who they thought their work looked cool, and they tried to emulate them, and they forgot the storytelling aspect of what they were doing. Would you agree with that?
But then you get a guy like Dan Pinoche.
Absolutely.
You know,
I'm not saying there's not.
no. I mean, here's a guy.
I'm talking about your growing list. Well, I mean, would you say that that's?
No, I mean, most of my list is not personal, it's all personal, not professional.
Okay.
I just like a lot of people on a personal level. But then again,
Then I appreciate not being on that.
but I'm equally, I'm so dislikable, it's okay. You know, I mean, I'm the walk in the park, you know, I know.
I think you're.
Bill's a much nicer person than I am.
Oh, I can.
He really is.
For sure.
Huh? Not a tough job. One of the easiest jobs he's ever gonna do. But no, I think it goes back, I think, to the fact that the comic book reader, the market has shrunk so much. And people tend to, I think it's an easily flattered audience, you know? And I think the audience really engages in that flattery. I think one of the reasons, one of the almost prerequisites for success is the sharing of the zeitgeist. Is a belief system that crosses over from the professional. I think there are artists who are extremely popular because they represent what the audience would do if it could.
Right.
It's kind of like the Axl Rose syndrome. Axl Rose was a successful musical figure because I think he was a guy who was like a blue collar idea that the audience felt they could identify with and become. And that talent is often very much the guy that in comics that succeeds. I won't name names. He knows who I'm talking about.
I just wonder, like, if some people are trying to be stars as collaborators.
Well, I'm curious, define what you mean by doing cool, just pretty pictures or cool pictures.
And don't name names.
I wouldn't anyway, but just drawing a bunch of shit on the page that, you know, excites the artist and not is part of the story. You know, like,
You're also
just
talking.
want to draw posters.
As opposed to could end up selling on an aftermarket.
Yeah, but I mean,
Well, you were saying earlier, like, talking about trying to sell things as opposed to telling stories.
well, I mean, in the course of this interview that Groff did with Ben Saunders, they were talking at great length about Kriegsteen. And Kriegsteen is one of those guys that every young fan hates. And if you grow up and if you develop eyes and a head, you realize how brilliant the work is. It's very cold, it's very impersonal, it's very detached. But in its own way, it shares that detachment with Kurtzman. And Kriegsteen historically hated splash panels. He just did. If you look at the best stuff he did, he was clearly getting away with not doing splashes. And I also have learned to hate splashes. I like starting my stories right in the middle. I'll do a splash page because I just did a job for Marvel last month, a war story that I had to do a splash because it's a Marvel job. It's a straight up job. But you know, I'm not a good draftsman on my own. I'm not a good writer on my own. The two things come together and create a synergy of skill set, and that's what it's about for me. So we were talking. I mentioned this to Bill at dinner. My stuff works when it's all together. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why I believe there is a vocabulary, there is a syntax to what we do. There's a structured narrative that. There are books that are not served by the artist, and that as much antipathy as I have for the writer, I'm also in situations frequently find myself where the artist does not step up to the plate and provide motif. Okay, I won't name names here because I like the guy personally, but there's a book that came out from DC last year that was just rife with motif, cleverly written, smartly written. And the artist just dropped the ball on finding all the elements that supported this character and really giving it. I'll talk after the fact. I'll be what I'm talking about off camera. But the problem is that most people who get into comic books don't care about reading or writing anymore. They care about drawing cool shit. But if they get schooled, look, I come out of apprenticeship. I had the shit kicked out of me by Gil Kane, by Gray Morrow, by Wallace Wood, by Neil Adams to a certain extent. And I learned how to do my craft by watching and listening to other guys, okay? And there's no, and I've always had assistants. You know, because my feeling is I can't pay those guys, they're gonna pass it on, okay? And I taught myself how to be as good as I am. I started shitty and I got good. And my commitment to everybody I've ever hired is that I will get you to do better work for me than you do for yourself. Because I'm harder on you than you'll ever be, because you're a lazy ass motherfucker. Okay? And I'm lazy by nature, but I've taught myself not to be. But a lot of it has to do with beyond instinct in looking at information, recognizing that pictures can have narrative value. Okay? In the craziest shit he's ever done, there's still narrative value. That show Legion owes a shitload to him. Not visually, but textually. Okay? Because Bill's depiction of the lunacy of superheroes, and see for me it's the New Mutant stuff. Because it's really coarse, it's really core. And it's just like, that it's just crazy ass shit, and it has enormous emotional content. The Electra stuff is more detached.
Right,
You know?
yeah, there is a little bit more of a remove, and a little bit more of throwing everything at the pages to see, you know.
Literally, as I recall.
Yeah, literally.
You know,
And trying to find a way to, one thing was trying to find a way to encapsulate different mindsets, you know, that were actually of the characters through emotion and through abstraction and through basically deviating from a very sort of standard point of view in terms of a style. It's like zigzagging. It's almost like a Rorschach test, you know, to get to what's underneath the character and what, you know, and that's where I certainly believe that, like again, I think Howard feels the same way. It's like presuming a level of intellect on the part of the reader.
right.
You know, it's like that they're not idiots. So the idea of, like, for me, like one of the things when you talk about, you know, pretty pictures, like it struck a nerve with me because I'm thinking about all the stuff I'm working on right now with Parisian White, and I'm doing a lot of single page images, and a lot of them are sort of set up. I know they're going to be in there somewhere. I don't know exactly how I'm going to place them or where they're going to be, but each one of them has to have a narrative point of view. And the same thing with motifs, is that, and I feel like that's also part and parcel of what an artist has to bring to it, is a sense of, again, motif is perfect, the perfect word. Something that will be like, or again, even musically, listen to music, the Morricone stuff for Once Upon a Time in the West. Each one of the characters has a leitmotif. It's like, you know that when they play this stuff, this certain, it's harmonica, you know, whatever. It's like you bring those elements in visually, and what that does is it sits in the reader's, in the back of their brain. And if a writer is actually smart, they'll take those visual motifs and it becomes more than words, more than pictures. It becomes the synthesis of the two.
Brian Azzarello and Eduardo Risa.
Sure, absolutely.
This work looks like it's the work of one person.
Right.
Okay. If Brian has any self-awareness, he should be lighting a candle with Eduardo every morning.
What I'm talking about is, what I'm saying is that you get that.
But many don't, and they
Right.
don't.
That's what I'm saying, is that why your list is growing? Because
No, my list is all personal. I hate it.
It's all-
Nothing to do with professional. No, I mean, my thing. I don't care. I really don't care about other people's work. I
The
honestly
reason
don't.
I ask, because my lack of interest in a lot of what's coming out now
Oh no, me it's all personal.
is that it's just about, it seems as if the artists are going, hey, I want this to be a cool t-shirt, as opposed to what story we're trying to tell in this cool picture.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I could give a shit. Like, if they make a fucking t-shirt, you know?
Right.
It's like, it's gotta have a reason. And I've also found this out in terms of, say, painted images. Single painted images are meant to be poured over. Images where there's just line and an economy of words and pictures, and it can be done with digital coloring or whatever. But the narrative aspect of it is that it's the old classic thing of it's important, what goes on between the panels, what's in between the gutter there, as opposed to what's happening in the panels. So you can actually have staccato, movement, telling the story, turn the page, double page spread, something that where people will land on it, and you want them to just slow down and take it in. You're actually, it's an orchestral aspect to it. You're in control of all of that in terms of how much time someone should spend on a panel or a page.
I try to do that in my.
Look, there are three schools of storytelling in comics. Okay, Eisner invents everything. You know, whatever distaste I have for him personally, he is on the show. I despised him, just an awful human being. He invented everything. When Jack Kirby's working in the 1940s, he's doing Eisner. I mean, Eisner really. I mean, and I didn't know this at the time because I only looked at DC comics from the golden age. Marvel's just ugly. I didn't know about the quality stuff, how good the quality stuff was, and how much of what Eisner was doing there. It isn't until Kurtzman comes along in the early 50s and you see that he introduces an entirely different way of thinking about narrative. And that thinking is to literally step back from Eisner's melodrama and romance to a kind of an almost detached, like a dead gaze, which is what he's doing there. Everybody else at DC is doing Eisner. You know, the science fiction books, the horror books, they're all doing Eisner. Okay? And then, due to solely economic reasons, there's a third element that develops, and that's Kirby Lee. Because if you look at Jack's stuff, you look at Marvel over the first 5-6 years of the company, as you know, when Jack makes Stan, okay, Jack ceases to be an action artist, he becomes an impact artist. You know, his stuff starts moving. The pictures become about the impact as opposed to getting there. All that in-betweening element, those shots of the challenge of the unknown on the airplane changing costume, that vanishes, okay? And what you've got now is writers seeking to achieve that Kirby Lee effect with Eisner technique. That's what's going on. That's why you get guys writing a 12-panel page for Frank Cho. What the fuck do you do giving Frank Cho 12 panels of page? You can do that with Chris Samney. You can do it with David Aja. But Frank is a deliberately illustrative talent. You need to have air and space. And there's nothing there. Okay? It's a complete misalliance between the two talents, the two skill sets. And the problem is, artists collude in allowing the writer to be the alpha by behaving like amateur dicks. They don't deliver, they don't do what they say they're gonna do, they fuck around, you know, they think that a month has 6 weeks, you know, I mean, come on. You know, it's that hobbyist sensibility, you know, because like you got a lot of guys who came into comics today, who came into comics because of the 90s, you know, and again, those books were elaborate sensory experiences, utterly bereft of narrative, okay? So you've got the capacity for reading, it diminishes, it just keeps going down, okay? We're fine. The end. Next. You out here?
I'm here.
All right, drive safely, don't do anything stupid, don't kill anybody, all right?
I'll see you soon.
Am I gonna see you on Wednesday or Thursday?
Shit, who knows?
Peter Boyer, ladies and gentlemen, Peter Boyer. John, what do you got? What's that? Oh, Alex! My God. I saw, John's right behind you. You changed. Forgive me. Go ahead. Hey, Alex, how are you?
When I spent a summer as an intern at Marvel, and I was in Spider-Man office, and at that time there was some hot art Spider-Man artist there.
I know him.
And at the end there, on every page he purposely makes one panel very big because he knows it'll sell more on the different art.
Right.
And
The money shot.
And I argue that day, to this day, that's what we were with the comics in the 80s. All those artists were just drawing splash pages and splash pages just so they could sell for big money on the original art market.
So you're saying it's literally a confederacy of whores. Okay. I mean, I no longer do pages at all anymore. I do my figures and backgrounds on separate sheets and combine them in Photoshop. So I completely sacrifice the existence of the page.
Yeah, I mean, I see the originals. I mean,
You know what they look like.
Apple,
Right, there's nothing there.
empty.
Exactly. And I just sent in 2 comps for Archie versus Predator 2. Why they called me.
Archie versus Predator.
You know me well enough to know
I wanted to make sure that I heard you.
that
That's
I can
all.
make up better than this, okay? And you know, I'm fascinated by the Archie phenomenon, you know. And you know, so they'll try anything once, you know. So I think what you're talking about is a mindset about the material that really derives from fanzines and the fan culture, you know. And when I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn, and in those days there was no fan presence in New York City. It was all in the Midwest. It was Bill Joe White. It was Roy Thomas. I mean, these guys in places that had really hard winters. I'm serious, because that's where comics were read. You didn't read comics, you lived in California. I mean, Spicer and Benson were very strange outliers in that regard. Comics found their fandom in cold weather climates. That's because you were indoors. I mean, I had breakfast every day with that guy to his left, okay? And he's never read a comic book in his life, you know? He's here because he wanted to meet Bill. You know? I'm serious. He doesn't give a shit about my work. He's seen Sienkiewicz or something. You know, and the influence of fan culture on comic books cannot be overstated. Because Stan opened the doors to this after the EC stuff had sort of set up the fan addicts. And Stan really played to the gallery. And the gallery believed it. You know, it's like that the concept of fan proprietorship these days is really disturbing to me. You know, the fact that the audience thinks it has a right to affect the material as it exists. But that sensibility, those splash panel pages, comes directly from them. You know, it's a fan-pleasing thing. And I give a shit.
I think, yeah, I think it's like, it's assuming, it's believing that art is a democracy. It's like,
Yeah.
it isn't,
Right.
yeah.
I told you about that guy. I was on a panel back in the days when miniseries were a new idea. And some guy got up and said he didn't like miniseries because he couldn't write it in effect the way it ended. I said, wow. And I think that's why I don't like video games. Because I don't like to be a democratic participant in the narrative thread. I want to be told the story as opposed to be part of it. I don't need to participate. You know, I tried virtual reality once and made me nauseous. And, I don't, you know,
Speaking of technology, what are your thoughts on motion comics?
You mean like,
look, one of the things that we've all seen is like the splash page. You turn the page, right? You can actually create that on a screen where you literally get like a jump scare. You know, it
obviates everything, every part of my skill set that I do.
Okay, no, I mean, I'm curious.
I mean, it really, because basically digital comics are full play. And I really like the idea. Even though I'm not doing a full page, I'm delivering a full page. And for me, you know, you talk about a single image. For me, the page is unto itself a single image.
Oh, I totally agree.
The panel itself is a microcosm of the page. And it all comes together. And that's what it's about. The digital comics obviate that existence. I like the idea. I mean, the first time I saw an iPad, I was on the line at LAX to go to JFK. There's a cat behind me reading a Romita Spider-Man comic book on an iPad. I said, holy fuck, that's it. That's the next delivery system. And, because I always thought it was going to be the pistol weapon. You know, I mean, like 25 years ago, I was a speaker at a lunch, I was the entertainment speaker at an LA County Bar Association meeting on IP. And I assumed that the future of our business was an epistolary form, that we would deliver directly to our audience the internet really wasn't an idea yet, but that, you know Gene Lee's Jazz Letter?
No.
Gene Lee's the guy who wrote the lyrics to The Girlfriend of Ipanema. He introduced Stan Getz to Astrid Gilberto and Jobim. He published a jazz, he lived down the street from Sergi.
Okay.
And Sergi, they hated each other, it was great.
Yeah.
And, pardon? Gene Lee's. He edited Downbeat for years, and he published all the Jazz Letter. And I said, that's the model. That I would do 8 pages, 10 pages a month, and just deliver to my audience, being like, mail it to them. And of course, we have the fabulous internet. But the companies have taken over the idea of that corporate digital. And I don't know. I mean, I like technology, but also I still have, I still have my cows in my house. You know? And, and it's clean now, because they'd scrub, because I knew I'd be seeing you. And I'd be ashamed. Although there's still some neglect. Yeah, there's some neglect. I like the combining of hard copy with technology. I really do. You still work there, don't you?
Yeah, there was a period, about a year, where I worked nothing but digital.
Really?
Yeah. And then, after a year, I thought, God, I need to get my hands dirty again. It's like I need to fight something, you know? It's just an antiseptic quality, and it also feels, it's like driving a really big car. It's like you hit something with the fender, it's like it's happening in Detroit, you know? It's like, you know, it's like there's nothing intimate about it. It's like I wanna like, if I fuck up, I want it to be a spectacular, you know, fuck up.
A couple weeks back, I think somebody points out on Facebook, how do you do this? And I looked at it and says, well, it's cellophane with resisting ink. You know,
Right.
and Hama and I did an entire back and forth thing of where we got it from. I thought it was Woody, and it was Vicente Alcazar. You know?
Okay.
Remember Vicente?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah.
You know, it's just one of these like it's where you take a piece of cellophane paper, like in our case it was a pack of cigarettes. You were a smoker at one point, weren't you?
No, it's been like 40 years for me.
Yeah, 26 for me. And you take the cellophane off a pack of cigarettes and take a wet brush and run it across it. And then use it, and it would resist. And it was the flying clods of earth from a horse's hoofs. It was part of an explosion, you know? And it was just like a really cool technique. And I'm realizing people have forgotten this shit.
Oh, it's amazing what, yeah.
You know, they don't know how to make an explosion with an X-Acto knife and ink. You know, Russ Heath refused to use paint to do a star field. He would do it he would prick it out with an X-Acto knife. And then just to show off, he would run his hand over it and eliminate it. And he'd push him back. Russ didn't get out a lot. Russ got out plenty. Those of us who know Russ Heath, he got out a great deal. But yeah, I mean,
It's with the spatter.
Oh yeah,
All of that stuff.
look, I mean, showing that to my grandson was like, oh, some other way I can fuck up my parents' house. Someone else, come on. Jack, what do you got?
Yeah, you apprenticed with 4 artists.
Ron, good night.
Thank you, sir.
You here.
You apprenticed with 4 artists. How did you know when it was, you know,
When they fired me.
oh, when they fired?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean,
did anyone else in your generation also apprentice?
Russ Heath, Ralph Reese, Larry Hama, Alan Kupperberg, Steve Mitchell, Klaus Jansen. Klaus was Dick's background man for years. We all did, because that was how you learn. You know, that aspect of our field has vanished and disappeared to its detriment, I think.
It died in the 90s because personal computers needed the ability to make a 4-color separation in your home garage. So you had
Interesting.
rock and roll money coming into the field, you had technical separation.
Talk loud enough so they can hear you.
Barrier to printing.
Barbara Castle, you know, talk loud enough so they can hear you.
That's the thing I haven't heard you guys talk about that really intrigued me, is we had that triangle in the 90s where apprenticeship went away because suddenly everybody had a personal computer that could create the separations that were the barrier to anybody at home doing their own 4-color printing. They could do black and white printing, but they couldn't go to Ronald's because they couldn't make the separations. So the PCs, letting them do the separations at home, the rock and roll money coming in because that was the first wave of people coming through San Diego doling out option money. So suddenly people were looking, not just doing their comic, but looking at the second paycheck of the option. And the third thing was apprenticeship went away because the field widened so much. There were so many people added after Image came in and all that. You had Image and Dark Horse and everybody. It got so wide. We no longer hired the people who'd gone through apprenticeship and learned their craft. We hired the 17-year-old who would show up because since that money, the video game money came into the field, the guys who were working stopped working. They'd keep the same income, but they'd work and play video games, so their output dropped like crazy. So we had to churn through and find anybody who could make some semblance of an image to hire to put out monthly comics. So that was the big turning point for me.
And I never knew any of this because I was doing television for a living at the time. I mean, I got to see comics in the 90s from a remove, and I was appalled.
But that's where apprenticeships stopped.
That's
Except
interesting.
now they're coming back into vogue because of sort of this folk style of doing art, for art's sake,
Well, I mean,
not just for the money.
In 81, I buttonholed Milton Caniff and Noel Sickles. They were guests of honor at the San Diego Convention. I spent an hour with them. And I asked them how to use an assistant, because they both had worked as assistants and used them. And they confirmed a lot of my suspicions. And I've always had guys working in the house, because frankly, there's shit I don't feel like doing anymore. Sorry, you know, just I've done that before, I'm not gonna do that anymore. You know, there's stuff, what's that?
It's like if you're down, eating the heads during the babies.
I'm not, I've never, I mean, nobody touches the figures much, you know, I mean, it's like, I spread it around. But, you know, I've got an IT guy in my house, and I have a background. And, my background guy is like, I beat him up for years. And I showed him Tacconi, and I showed him, Sickles. And you could see a light go on behind his head, it was unbelievable. The guy's he's an ex-gangbanger, he's tattooed from here, he's like an entire shirt. And, one of the mellowest guys I've ever known, and, is incredibly good. And I wish if he's ambitious, I'm fucked, you know, so there you go. But I mean, I learned my craft penciling for Woody, you know, and for Gray. I ghosted a lot of stuff for Gray. The difference is that I never talked about it until he was dead. That's the job. You keep your mouth shut. You don't spread it around, you know. I did commercial work for Neil, and I never did any drawing for Gil, because I wasn't good enough. And he was embarrassed to send me to deliver work to the office, because I looked like every kid did in 1969. I had hair down on my shoulders, fried boots, bell-bottom jeans, and a work shirt. And, you know, this is a guy who woke up in the morning wearing an answer. He actually would show up, he would walk out of his room in an Astrakhan robe and an ascot, you know. No one ever thought he was gay, you know. But he was not gay. Gil met his first wife, his second wife on his first honeymoon. I've seen the pictures.
How long did the first marriage last?
I think it lasted from around, I think about 10 years, maybe a little longer than that.
One of his like wives, and
Elaine, you never met Diane, did you?
I've always felt incredibly sorry for her. She looked incredibly miserable.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. It was like, I just felt like, wow, it's like, you know.
Well, my second wife and I, we socialized with them a great deal. And Gil had no palate, he ate like a child. I'm quite serious. He spent 3 weeks in Paris once and ate omelets every meal, because he was afraid the host would trick him into eating rabbit. And he ate like a child. He would butterfly like a ribeye, just like, why are you doing that? That's a terrible thing to do to me. And we ended up eating a place in Germantown, New York, called the Kleine Kinderei, which of course is long gone. Germantown is gone now. Of course, it's Yorkville now. And I invited him there. I said, Gil, you'll love it. They planned the Holocaust there. And what? Jews can say that. It's okay. You know. So it was, and the evenings would consist of me, my then wife, who was the smartest woman I've ever known, and Gil in spirited discussion, and Elaine would literally nurse on my drink.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
It's kind of how I remember.
Yeah.
Sad.
So, someone else? Yes, you, who look like Oscar Isaacs from a distance.
I'm not.
He's not Oscar Isaacs, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you both so much for doing this. You both are huge figures in my comic book and art life. Shadow #1 was one of the first books that I actually really wanted to go buy. And I dragged my mom across the valley.
How old were you?
Oh gosh, I think I was 14.
Okay, fuck it then. All right.
I dragged my mom across the valley to Golden Apple in Northridge to buy it. It was awesome. And Bill, I have to apologize, because when I bought the Daredevil graphic novel, I was really pissed off that Frank Miller didn't do the
You've come to your senses, I assume.
Yes. I find it, whether it's a simple line drawing or it's a spectacular painting, I find it mesmerizing that you do what you do. And it's shocking to hear that it's always a struggle for you, or that there might not be some satisfaction. It could be the simplest line or the most detailed piece. Everything you do, everything you post is just shocking that you've done it again. And I was just wondering what the thought process is while it's
Well,
happening.
I appreciate that. Maybe I should be a little more clear. There's a certain facility that comes, I mean, I've done this ever since I was a little kid, so, I mean, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
But the thing is that there's certain things I can actually do relatively quickly. You know, there are certain things, there are pieces I've done where I'm really happy with how they come out, but it's at a certain point, it's almost like the very minimum I'd expect is to be professional. You know, it's like in some pieces kind of will go a little bit beyond that. At the very least, it's got to be at a certain level. Some pieces kind of transcend that, and I feel like I've hit a certain place that I'm really happy about. But what never really does get any easier is how to figure out the context in which it's going to be put. It's not just about doing a pretty piece for the sake of doing a pretty piece. Again, it does have to fall into a narrative place. And for me, the ultimate calling for me is comics. It's like, I feel like what Howard said about doing, illustration in a magazine or doing movie posters or something like that. I always loved the idea of being able to do that. But at the end of the day, what really feels like it's in my DNA is comics. It's narrative. It's telling a story. So all of that other stuff is sort of at the service of that. So I might feel like I've nailed a piece and I just knocked the piece out of the park, visually, but and be happy with it. But I also feel that it has to in some way. It's almost like there are times when I've actually felt it's more than this segment of time that I'm conveying calls for. It's like it's throwing way too much stuff. A lot of stuff I look back at now with the with the lecture or whatever. There are times I look at it and I feel like I did more than was actually really called for. It's like being a bass player. It's like you go in and just do a guitar riff like Eddie Van Halen and just drive everybody crazy with all the fretwork, or you can do what's necessary. You can do the job. You can do just as much. It's that restraint. It's like listening to singers who can't hit the same high notes that they could, in terms of the acrobatics, but they compensate for it in other ways. So for me, one of the things that I'm more intrigued by now is developing a backlog of technique and things that where I can kind of do all this stuff, but at the same time it's almost like, well, just because I can, it's like, how do I work smarter, not harder? It's like it's that kind of a thing. I don't know if you go through any of that,
My work is more spade and straight than yours. I mean, I've stepped away from doing the more eccentric looking material, mostly because guess what time? Mostly because I feel like I'm best served by keeping it simple. That said, I'm working on the third volume of Times Squared right now, which is a very difficult process for me because I'm going back and doing things that I haven't done in 4 years. And having to remember to overwrite, to create panels that have a nervous energy that aren't necessarily as deliberately literal as I've been doing, is really, I have to keep reminding myself to do this all the time. And I succeed in some cases and fail in others. And the other thing is that the originals were done in blue line, that incredibly crude process.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And now, of course, we've got this absolutely gorgeous color effect. I mean, the things we can do with color is staggering. And my colorist understands explicitly and implicitly something. I don't want to make the same mistakes, but I want to achieve the same effects.
Right. Okay.
And Brusenak is going to be lettering. Brusenak is the best at what he does and a raging pain in the ass at the same time. because when he chooses to, he can be very literal. And then when you want it to be literal, he gets a little, over here. And so in looking at the pages I was working on today, they're very methodical and very, very direct, but I know once color is applied, and once we start introducing the super text, because there will be, even in places with large areas of blank space, will be filled with text, right, because it's a very noisy book. So working today in this way is so much of what I was talking about earlier about planning my mission. I have to really anticipate how fucking weird it's going to be on Thursday when I'm doing this on Monday.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it's all done in piecemeal. It's all put together slowly.
Right.
And I haven't painted in 20 years. and I have no desire to go back to it again. But I really like the freedom I've discovered in realizing that I'm never gonna have to learn to ink a comic book. I don't know how to ink. I have no idea what that means. I make drawings. I make reasonably reproducible. I look at Jordanus, I look at, the fact that Klaus has become a penciler staggers me, and the work is, that stuff you guys did together, when I saw those pencils, I was floored. They were competitive with stuff that he was doing. They were just
It
brilliant.
was just amazing stuff, yeah.
And I can't make that transition. I sit there and I methodically massage it, I'll take a little bit of tape and clean it up and just, because I'm sloppy,
Well, yeah, I share that with you, I'm totally a slob, but,
But I like getting dirty.
well, I'd say so do I, but but for me also, the problem I have also with the business is the artifice of it, and, because I don't look at it as penciling and inking, I think of it as drawing with ink.
Right. Making pictures.
Yeah, that's all it is, to me, that's a little bit like the old, Ford program of trying to put stuff on an assembly line. It's like, okay, you're gonna be putting in the windshields, you're gonna be doing the tires, it's like, no, we're making a car here, so let's just put the whole thing together, in that way.
I'm physically incapable of doing that. I just have no skill set there at all. And it wasn't until I got comfortable with that reality that I was okay with what I did.
Okay, sure.
Marker, ink, brush, pencil, just make a mess.
Right.
Hopefully something. And thank God for contemporary production.
Oh, yeah, that's one of the things when I do the memorial pieces, I found that,
Now, you're doing those by hand. Those aren't.
those are all by hand. Occasionally I'll do a black and white and maybe I'll scan it in, maybe add a color
Right,
overlay or whatever.
but you're still getting dirty.
Right, but yeah, they're all about that because I don't have, there's a clock ticking. It's like I give myself 2 hours top to do a piece if something happens. So, and then.
In case they come back?
No, yeah. But the idea of actually saying I don't have to worry about any kind of preconceived idea because whoever, like if I do a piece like of Joni Mitchell's birthday or so whatever, it's like, I'll go, this piece has to be in black and white for some reason, or this piece is gonna be in color. And so when I dive into it, I have no preconceptions, it's gotta look a certain way. So it's all about process. It's not about, I'm not thinking about the result, because it's like, the only thing I care about is whether it looks like the person or not, or even more or less feels like the person, as opposed to looks like the person.
For me, the Roth piece would kill me.
The Philip, yeah, well, to me, that's what he was to me, yeah, but thank you, yeah, so.
This woman.
Yes.
So I know that comics is your art, but I wonder if either or both of you have at any points in your career really done more like a personal artwork that you shown in gallery, maybe in a different way from beyond comics?
Well, I've actually had, gallery shows for paintings and stuff like that. But I also feel, to me, the idea of actually having comic work in galleries, there was actually a museum in Madrid that had some of my political comics brought to life stuff in the same museum, literally right around the corner from like Picasso and Botticelli. And I was like, this is, it's like,
Yeah.
to me, I think comics can do anything. So the idea of actually doing a landscape or whatever, I like that idea, but it's, to me, it's not the same as doing the medium.
Yeah.
It's like, this is where my blood boils, the most.
And I'm a comics man, I got nothing. My wife who has never read a comic book in her life and has no idea what I do for a living. She has a vague notion of it, and I mean vague. She will often say, write a novel, write a musical. Nah, I'm good. I love comics. I love the idea of comics so much more than the reality of comics, but I love comics nonetheless.
Yeah.
And I still have I sit down at my desk. I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day because I'm that guy. And I go out and do a bunch of shit. I have breakfast with old people like that. And I like having breakfast with people older than me because it makes me feel boyish. And I'm at my desk by my 9 o'clock. And once I settle down, I'm really digging what I'm doing. I really am. I like the idea of solving the problem that's every step of the way. And making accidents work is the way to go. And I'm 68 years old. And since I'm Jewish, I'm not really white. But, I know I'm considered an old white man by an enormous part of the comic book community at large. And fuck them. I'm not going anywhere. I plan to retire by the sound of my head hitting my desk, and I'm not followed by a yelp. I'm as long as my skill set holds up, I'll keep doing this.
Do you actually still feel really, it's kind of almost disconcerting to hear you say that you feel that you've been marginalized to the extent that,
absolutely.
It's like I guess I don't experience you that way.
I am profoundly marginalized. Because first of all, I disappeared from comics in the 90s, and there's an entire generation that's come of age at that time. There are people who, look, in the space of a week, I was referred to by some nitwit on the left as a demon in a human skin suit, and then the same week as a neutered butler of the social justice warriors. Ouch. Poetry on both sides. Now, if these fuckers,
pissing off both sides.
if these fuckers would actually make a fucking living and stop spending so much time hating me, there might actually, one of the things that the progressive left seems to have problems with is the Nazi right. Me too. But it would be interesting if while they were slinging shit at each other, somebody might actually do a good book. No, the work they're doing is this anodyne horse shit. I'd like to see a really good crypto-fascist comic book. I'd like to see someone come along and do for comic books what Norman Spinrad did for science fiction with The Iron Dream. The Lord of the Swastika. The first classical performance I ever heard in my life in person, I was dating the woman who became the mother of my child, was the Brandenburg Concerto. It was conducted by Herbert von Karajan, who was Hitler's favorite conductor. I found this halfway through the show, my date was this beautiful redheaded Dutch girl who had no real context. I was like, oh my God, Hitler, that kind of shit. But it's very tough being loathed and despised by both sides of the aisle because neither of them read my stuff. They just presume. They grant themselves a narcissistic power to identify through their projection exactly what these things mean. The ambiguity has no context for these people. To a great extent, the first cover of the Divided States of Hysteria, which is a picture of a woman wearing a niqab made of an American flag, presumptions were made by what I meant, but I meant nothing. It was simply a provocative image, with no specific intent to provoke, just an image that was provocative. Didn't say one thing or the other. But because these people grant themselves these psychic powers, they draw conclusions, okay? Now, the people who should hate me on the right, because I am, after all, a reasonably leftist sort of cat. But the marginally, where I am out here in the margins is because, unlike my contemporaries, I didn't identify and build a career by doing a mainstream superhero character to generate an audience who would stay with me and follow me. Also, I make my taste and interest abundantly clear, and that doesn't endear me to a lot of people who read comic books. I don't care. And one of the reasons I came to California was because I recognized, as I said, I was never going to make a lot of money in comic books. And I was going to get this fucking old, and I know what Social Security does for you. I went and worked in television. I never worked in a show I'd watch, but I made enough of a living to own real estate and get a pension, which gives me enormous freedom. And that freedom pays for my ability to do whatever I damn well please. I don't care about superhero comic books, I don't do superhero comic books. I do genre material because I like genre material. I like westerns, I like fucking stories, I like crime, and I like doing all that kind of stuff, and I like drawing and I like writing it. And the audience doesn't read the material. The audience simply imposes its own conclusions on the material. And I expect this from the Nazis. I'm disappointed by the left. They embarrass me because I vote their way. And I said to someone recently who demanded that I denounce the people at Comicsgate, having no idea what the Comicsgate was at the time because I don't really care about other people. I'm kind of solipsist, as I said. And I investigated what they were so upset about. I think it was 3 guys who were also my Facebook friends. And I read it, I went back and I gave it a 24-hour, and I wrote back and I said, you should know that when Hitler came to power, he wasn't elected by a majority. And that it wasn't until the German people found that their lives were improved by the Nazis that they became perfectly willing and complicit in the course. So those of you out there who are asking to denounce are going to be denouncing your friends sooner or later if this autocracy continues. So get ready. Some of you look over your shoulder, look to your left, look to your right. Some of the people who are your friends now are going to fuck you later. So I ended up unfriending the people that they accused me of, that they suggested I defriend, but also the schmuck who asked me to denounce in the first place. So fuck that guy. We live in an ideological world that objects to ideas, that is afraid of ideas, that rejects iconoclasm in the sense of a victim culture. And fuck them. You know, if you really want to be victimized, you can do it on your own. Leave me alone. Leave me out of this. So I get up in the morning. I do what I do, and I hope someone likes it. I can't depend on an audience that I mean. Bill knows this. I think I can speak for both of us. We both have an enormous number of people in the comic book business who have utter contempt for their audience and yet take their praise as just. You can't do that. I believe that's impossible. I remain completely neutral to my audience's intentions. If someone tells me how much they love my work, I'm also reminded always that they also like shit that I hold in complete contempt. You know, right?
Yeah, no, that does factor into it.
So, you know.
Also, the one thing that the thing that strikes me about, especially on the left, you know, one of the things that I've seen a lot of is it reminds me a lot of the battle between vegans and vegetarians about purity. When the carnivores are just going completely off the rails. You know, it's like, no, we're more pure than you are. It's like, and I just, it's like, it just drives me crazy. It just, I don't know what my point was, but that.
I like it. The worst television show where I ever watched was a show called Earth Final Conflict, which is like a bad television show and a novel about bad television. And the guy who was the showrunner was a guy who never had any experience as a writer in his life. He was rewriting everybody. He was a disbarred lawyer. He was the first vegan I ever knew. And it's poisoned my relationship with the entire culture. I have to remind myself whenever I meet someone who's a vegan, they're not Paul. They are not Paul. They are people. You know, you wouldn't run them over again. You know, that kind of. But yeah, I think it's a balanced point. I do because it is. We are becoming micro tribes. We are slowly but surely slivering ourselves smaller and smaller into tinier and tinier ideologies. And I grew up. I'm a member of a popular confront family. My parents were classic Reds. The earliest known photograph of my Uncle Julie was getting punched in the face by a cop. And that we grew up that way. And so my credentials as a leftist are pretty solid. I'm pretty comfortable with this. And unlike a lot of people who think you grow more conservative as you get older, this is not true for me. I'm not that guy. And when I find myself charged by people whose identity is defined by a sense of hurt that just staggers me. I mean, are any of you aware of, like, the past couple of years, there was this, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, there was this whole spate, NPR was reporting this, but all these sex parties going on among teenagers, 13-year-old kids, you know, with oral sex as currency. What happened? Why not? They're not fucking and the incels can't get laid. You know, it's like, what happened? When did that happen? And someone pointed out today, how can a culture raised on South Park be so offended by everything? You know, really? You know? I mean, I grew up with a desperate need to argue. I mean, I grew up in a Talmudic family, and I learned to argue from the Jews outside the shul, who argued about the Torah and the Yankees. And it was serious. I mean, this was some serious shit, you know? Every one of them smoked Chesterfields, you know? And they taught me how to behave in public. And, you know, and I'm not a walk in the park, you know? But I'm astonished at the delicacy of this culture, the Eloy and Morlock nature of the future. And,
well, yeah, I like, I mean, the whole thing about going to college, you know, it's like, the whole concept of safe spaces, just, it does drive me absolutely up. Yeah, trigger warnings, exactly, all that.
Well, my assistant, as I said, is high spectrum autistic, and I explained to him that extent of his autism, he's a fucking idiot, you know, and that is the way it goes, because I cannot accept the fact that there's a quote from Eldridge Cleaver in a book of meditation that was just, too much agreement spoils the chat, and I tend to agree, you know. I don't have friends that I agree with on everything. I mean, I like that old fucker. You know, that he's just a whiny Lutheran, okay? And I should have known. I should have known. Oh, no, but he's also known in that context as America's favorite Jutheran. These are men that you know, disagree with me on almost everything I believe. And being disagreed with keeps you young and green. It gives you the impetus to move forward and tell you, no, fuck you, this is why. This is why. You know, no. You know, it's not like using sarcasm on cats. You know, it's actually having a conversation. You know, and I you know, I live in a small town, and I like living in a small town because people have no idea what they do for a living. When they find out, it's like peanuts, and I see it just like just like peanuts. That's what it's about, yeah, baby. You know, so.
That's why you and Schultz were never in the same.
That's right, you know. Marty and me, baby. You know. So, I think we have time for one more, and then we're going to slip off into the night and get curdled. Okay. None? You're done? You've completed your mission? Okay. Have you had a good time?
I certainly have.
I've had a fabulous time. You guys. Can we thank Michael before we go anywhere?
Okay, 3 quick things before everybody goes. First of all, the Art Center Library brought some books by these 2 guys. Anybody who wants to look through them, just don't steal them. You're stealing from the library? Don't do that.
And those of you who do want to steal,
oh, well, on the other hand. Second thing is 2 more events this semester. Next week, Fucking Superheroes. It's, if you're interested in Silver Age Captain America with Jim Steranko, that's coming next Monday.
but he's not going to be here.
No. Harlan Schumer is going to be here to present in Jim's place. And 2 weeks from then, if you're interested in the EC comics of the 50s that were censored and destroyed by Wortham and Company, there's my class is going to a theatrical group is going to be putting on a performance of banned EC comics. So there's that. Okay, number 3. Howard and Bill, people.